Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Before you drift off, it would be a nice idea if you could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from. Please don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed, and let's begin. Story 1, The Last Ride. The night air clung to me like a damp blanket as I stepped out of the bar, the remnants of laughter and loud music still echoing in my ears. I'd been out with friends, celebrating a recent promotion, but as I walked to the curb, that celebratory buzz started to fade, replaced by an annoying sense of unease. The streets felt eerie under the flickering streetlights, shadows stretching and bending unnaturally, as if they were alive. I pulled my coat tighter around myself and summoned my Uber. A few minutes later, I received a notification. Your driver is arriving. Name, Derek. I couldn't help but glance around, half expecting my friends to jump out and surprise me. Instead, I saw only empty streets and the flickering lights that seemed to taunt me. My phone buzzed again, and I turned, spotting a car slowly approaching. It was an unremarkable sedan, dark and sleek, gliding to a stop beside me. I pressed the button to unlock the door, glancing at the driver as I slid into the back seat. He was in his mid-30s, with short-cropped hair and a face that could blend into any crowd. "Hey there," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Where to?" "East Willow Lane, please," I replied, trying to brush off the creeping feeling in my stomach. He nodded and pulled away from the curb, the city lights swirling outside as we drove deeper into the night. At first, the ride was unremarkable. We navigated through familiar streets, but after a few minutes, I noticed something was off. Instead of taking the direct route, he veered left, heading towards a dimly lit road I didn't recognize. "I think you missed a turn," I said tentatively, my voice catching slightly as a knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. "Oh, I know a shortcut," he said, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. "Trust me, it'll be quicker this way." I forced a smile, trying to convince myself he was just trying to be helpful. Yet the way he spoke felt strangely intimate, as if he had been following my life for longer than I was comfortable admitting. A nervous laugh escaped my lips. "I've never heard of this way before." "Are you sure?" "Yeah, it's a hidden gem," he continued, his eyes flicking back to the road. "I've driven around here a lot." "You're a local, right?" I hesitated, my heart beginning to race. "Yeah, I live not far from here." I wondered how he knew I was local. Maybe he had picked up on my accent or the way I navigated through the city, but his comment left a faint whisper of dread lingering in my mind. As the car wound through increasingly deserted streets, the glow from the dashboard illuminated my driver's face in a way that felt unsettling. I caught sight of his thick neck and the way his fingers gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale against the leather. "You know, I've picked you up before," he said casually, but my heart skipped a beat. It was the way he said it, like he was reliving a memory. "A few months ago, I think. You were at that cafe on Maple." I glanced out the window, the familiar sights morphing into shadows. "I don't remember that," I replied, trying to sound casual, but I felt a chill running down my spine. "Oh, you were wearing that red scarf," he added, his tone shifting, becoming almost conspiratorial. "It suited you. Very memorable." Each word felt like a thread tightening around my throat, and I forced myself to breathe deeply, the air feeling heavy and cold. He was watching me, I realized, his eyes flicking toward me more often than was comfortable. "Do you remember much about your passengers?" I asked, hoping to steer the conversation away from my discomfort. His laughter was sudden and sharp, echoing off the car's interior. "It's part of the job," he replied. "You pick up on things, you know? People's little quirks, their lives." As he spoke, I could feel his gaze lingering on me in the rearview mirror, dissecting me in ways I wished I could ignore. The car turned onto a road lined with dense trees, their branches arching overhead like skeletal fingers. Are we still going the right way? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Of course, he said, but the smile on his face felt wrong, jagged at the edges. I know these roads like the back of my hand. You should relax, it's just a short drive. I glanced at my phone, the screen reflecting my pale face back at me. The map showed we were far off the predicted route, and my heart raced as I contemplated my next move. I think I'd feel better if you just turned back, I suggested, hoping to sound assertive. I'd like to take the main road. Don't worry about it, he replied, his voice low and almost soothing. I promise you'll get home safe. Just a little longer. My pulse quickened, a feeling of dread washing over me as the trees closed in around us, swallowing any remaining light. I had to get out. Stop the car, I demanded, my voice trembling despite my efforts to sound firm. He turned to me, his expression unreadable, and for a moment, I thought I saw something dark flicker in his eyes. Don't be silly, he said, his tone almost condescending. You'll feel so much better once you get home. But all I could think was how trapped I felt, how the walls of the car felt heavier with each word he spoke. The night stretched endlessly, a chasm between us and reality. And somewhere deep down, I wondered if I was truly alone. I leaned back against the cool leather seat of the Uber, trying to shake off the remnants of the night. The laughter of friends faded into the background, replaced by the subtle hum of the city at night. A glance at my phone confirmed the driver's identity, Marlon. The app indicated he was on his way, but it didn't feel like he was heading home. The car pulled up to the curb, and I climbed in, a wave of relief washing over me as I closed the door. I offered a cordial hi as I settled into the seat, but Marlon didn't return my greeting. He merely nodded, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I had ordered the ride out of habit, feeling too exhausted to navigate public transport at this hour. Yet, as the vehicle lurched forward into the night, my sense of unease began to bubble beneath the surface. I glanced at the GPS on my phone, noticing that Marlon had taken a different route than I expected. Instead of heading towards the familiar streets of my neighborhood, we wandered deeper into the less traveled side of the city. The streetlights flickered above, casting elongated shadows that danced wildly across the pavement. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Are you sure this is the quickest way?" Marlon's grip tightened on the steering wheel, and he spoke without turning his head. "I know a few shortcuts. Trust me, it'll be faster." I swallowed hard. Something in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. There was an eerie confidence in it. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, the atmosphere inside the car thickening with an unsettling tension. Flashes of the earlier evening flickered through my mind, laughter, dancing, the warmth of friends, but somehow it all felt distant now. I pulled my phone from my pocket, intending to text Amy, but the screen lit up with a notification instead. It was a message from her, sent just minutes before. "Get home safe. Don't talk to strangers." A cold tremor of anxiety coursed through me. "Do you live around here?" I ventured, hoping to coax a safer conversation. Marlon chuckled softly, the sound unsettling. "You could say that. I know this city well." I tried to catch a glimpse of his face, but all I could see were the shadows etched across his features. A part of me wanted to panic, to demand he take me home, but a stronger impulse made me stay calm. My only anchor was the dim glow of my phone screen, illuminating my fingers as I tapped out a message to Amy, telling her I felt uneasy. I hesitated before hitting send, remembering how late it was. I needed to maintain control, but the sensation of being watched crept in. I peered out the window as the buildings morphed from familiar to foreign. Marlon turned down a narrow street, lined with unkempt lawns and flickering porch lights that barely illuminated the dark. Each turn felt wrong, leading us deeper into the unknown. Do you know the neighborhood well? I asked, forcing a nonchalance I didn't feel. Very well, he replied, his eyes still locked ahead. In fact, I've seen you around. You like to go out a lot, don't you? My heart dropped. What do you mean? He chuckled again, but this time it had a menacing edge. You're a regular at that bar on Elm. I noticed you the last time you were there. The way you laughed with your friends, the way you talked to that guy, what was his name? I felt the blood drain from my face. Who? The one with the dark hair. You seemed to like him a lot. I felt trapped in the car, the reality of my situation crashing over me like icy water. I punched the screen of my phone, desperately seeking the call button, but the connection to the outside world felt severed. My hand shook slightly as I gripped the seat, forcing myself to breathe, to remain calm. Look, just take me home, please, I forced out, my voice trembling. Marlon turned to me finally, and in that moment, I saw his eyes dark, devoid of kindness. Home isn't really a safe place, is it? I swallowed hard. Images flashed through my mind, the times I had walked alone, the shadows that seemed to watch me from the corners of my vision. Had he been there, lurking? I fished for my keys in my purse, the cold metal feeling like a lifeline. You don't need to do this, I managed, sounding less convincing than I had hoped. I'm just a customer, just trying to get home. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Everyone has their secrets, don't they? Yours are just more interesting. Panic surged through me, and I fumbled for my phone again. I was about to hit the call button when he abruptly turned onto a gravel road. My stomach dropped as the headlights illuminated a dilapidated building up ahead. It loomed like a specter in the dark, its windows shattered and broken, a graveyard of forgotten dreams. Where are we going? I demanded, fighting against the rising tide of fear. I just wanted to show you something, he said, his tone dripping with malice. As he slowed to a stop, the weight of dread settled heavily in my chest. The shadows of the night closed in around us, and I felt the urge to flee, to open the door and run, but my body was frozen in place. I could barely breathe. Get out, he said, his voice commanding. A flicker of movement caught my eye. Was that a figure lurking among the trees? I strained to see, heart pounding. Then a scream clawed its way up my throat, but the night swallowed it whole. In that moment, all I could think was that I had trusted a stranger. And now, a stranger was about to become my worst nightmare. The dim glow of streetlights flickered past the window as I sat in the back seat, my heart still pounding from the chaos of the night. The bar had felt like a refuge from my mundane life, but it quickly devolved into a whirlwind of laughter that masked the gnawing anxiety I had carried with me. I had just wanted to feel something, anything, but now I was encased in an uncomfortable silence, the air thickening with unease. I glanced at the Uber app on my phone. The estimated time to my apartment felt like an eternity, and the map showed a route I hadn't taken before. I frowned, attempting to suppress the rising tide of panic. The driver, a man with a heavy-set build and a cap pulled low over his eyes, hadn't spoken much since I had climbed into the vehicle. The soft hum of the engine was the only sound, but I could feel his gaze flicking to me in the mirror every few seconds, his expression unreadable. Excuse me, I ventured, trying to break the silence. Is there a shortcut you're taking? He chuckled softly, his eyes never meeting mine. Just a scenic route, you know? Gives us time to talk. I stiffened. Talk about what? About you, of course, he replied, and I felt a chill travel down my spine. I turned my gaze back to the window. The streets were eerily quiet, and the sudden thought that I had unknowingly stepped into a trap clawed at my mind. I had heard stories of women disappearing from rides like this. Anxiety surged as I forced myself to breathe steadily. "Is it a long night for you?" he asked, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "I guess," I mumbled, my heart racing. "Just trying to get home." "Home," he echoed, his tone now laced with a strange intensity. What a comforting word. "Is your home really where you feel safest?" A shiver prickled my skin. I didn't like the way he twisted my words, as if he knew more about me than he should. Had I said something earlier that made me vulnerable? The night blurred in my mind, a haze of laughter, drinks, and faces that blended together. I shifted in my seat, an overwhelming urge to reach for my phone and call someone, anyone, slammed into me. But I didn't dare take my eyes off the driver. "Do you live alone?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. I hesitated, debating whether to answer. "Why do you want to know?" "I just want to make sure you're safe," he replied, the softness of his tone now unsettling. "You wouldn't want to walk into anything dangerous." "Why would you care?" I shot back, my voice trembling. "Because I've seen you before," he said, and my stomach dropped. "In the coffee shop, at the grocery store. You always seemed so lost." My heart raced even faster. A sense of dread enveloped me as I realized he had been tracking my movements, his words a chilling reminder of my own vulnerability. I felt isolated in that car, a captive audience to a twisted narrative that he had constructed around me. "Stop the car," I demanded, my voice firm even as my hands shook. He laughed again, a low, unsettling sound. "Where would you go?" "You're safer with me than out there." The streets blurred past, but my mind was racing. I remembered how I'd felt when I had arrived at the bar, free, confident, ready to forget my worries. Now, I was trapped in a nightmare, the walls of the car closing in around me. Panic clawed at my throat as I fumbled for the door handle. It wouldn't budge. "Let me out," I shouted, my voice rising with desperation. "Relax," he said, his tone still disturbingly calm. "We're almost there." "Where is there?" I pressed, my pulse hammering in my ears. He turned his gaze briefly to the road, but then looked at me in the mirror again, his expression unreadable. "Don't you want to know what I know?" My stomach twisted as the reality of what he meant sank in. Every step I took outside my apartment, every casual outing I had enjoyed, he had been there, lurking in the shadows. It was suffocating, the thought that I had unknowingly invited danger into my life. "Do you think I wanted this?" he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I just wanted to help you. You seemed so alone." "No one asked for your help," I snapped, desperation fueling my anger. "You're making me uncomfortable." He smirked, a cruel twist on his lips. "That's not my intention. But you should be grateful. I've saved you from worse." Before I could respond, he suddenly took a sharp turn onto a secluded road, one that wound deeper into the night, away from civilization. My heart plummeted, adrenaline coursing through me as I scanned my surroundings for any sign of escape. Thick trees loomed on either side of the car, shadows dancing in the headlights. "Where are we going?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "To a place where you can finally feel safe," he said, his tone oddly soothing, as if he were trying to lull me into submission. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I pushed them back. "I need you to let me out. Right now." He paused, a moment that stretched into eternity. Then he laughed again, a cold sound that echoed in the small space. "You really don't understand, do you? You can't just escape what's meant to be." As the realization washed over me, the oppressive weight of his words settled in my chest. This was no ordinary ride home. It was the culmination of a dark obsession that I had never seen coming. In that moment, the world outside the car faded, leaving only the suffocating intimacy of the space between us, and I knew I had to act before it was too late. The moment I stepped into the Uber, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. It was late, and the streets were mostly deserted, the flickering streetlights casting elongated shadows that twisted like creatures trying to crawl back into the darkness. I slid into the back seat, greeted by the sour smell of stale cigarettes mixed with the sweet undertone of something more rancid. The driver glanced back, a shadow obscuring his features, but I caught a glimpse of dark eyes that seemed to glint with something unsettling. "Hey there, where to?" he asked in a voice that sounded too smooth, too rehearsed. I read his name on the app. Eric uttered it like a mantra beneath my breath as I settled in. "Home," I replied, my voice a mere whisper against the backdrop of my pounding heart. As he merged into the sparse traffic, I couldn't help but notice that he hadn't followed the direct route. My place was just a few turns away, yet he navigated toward the quieter back roads instead. A flicker of unease crept into my mind. "Long night out?" he inquired, his eyes flicking to me in the rearview mirror. "Just hanging out with some friends," I replied, trying to project calmness. My pulse quickened when I realized he was scanning my reactions, as if assessing how much I knew. "I saw you at the Rusty Nail," he said casually, as if it were the most mundane observation. "You were dancing. You have quite the move." My breath hitched. The Rusty Nail was a popular bar, but I had been there only a handful of times, and last night's escapades had been nothing remarkable. Had he been watching me? I swallowed hard, trying to push the thought away. "Yeah, it was fun," I managed, forcing a smile. He nodded, but the way he looked at me, like a scientist observing an intriguing specimen, made me uncomfortable. I turned my gaze to the window, trying to focus on the passing landscape, but the darkness outside felt alive, pressing in on me. The trees blurred past, their branches clawing at the air like skeletal fingers. "Have you always lived around here?" he asked, his voice smooth but edged with something unplaceable. "I've been here a couple of years," I answered, trying to keep my tone light. The further we drove down this unfamiliar path, the more my anxiety spiraled. I pulled my phone from my bag, half expecting to see the estimated time of arrival, but the screen was dark. The battery must have died during the night. "Great. Do you have family nearby?" he continued, unperturbed by my silence. "Just a sister who lives a few hours away," I managed, forcing the words through clenched teeth. Every question felt like a probe, digging deeper. He nodded again, eyes flickering to the GPS. "I know how to get to your place, you know," he said, an unsettling smile creeping across his face. "You don't have to worry about a thing." The warmth of the car was suffocating, and I found myself scanning the surroundings. There were no streetlights here, only the intermittent glow of the moon bathing everything in a pale white light. Forest loomed on either side, swallowing the road in its depths. My heart raced. "Eric, could you take a different route?" "I think you've missed a turn," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, even as my stomach twisted in fear. He chuckled, a low, dark sound that sent chills down my spine. "I know a shortcut. You should trust me." He glanced back, the smile now a predatory grin, revealing teeth too sharp, too perfect. In a panic, I reached for the door handle, but it felt like a lifetime spent fumbling. He was fast, his laughter echoing in the confined space, rising with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You're going to want to relax," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "We'll get there soon enough." My breath came in quick bursts. I wished I could scream, but all that escaped was a strangled gasp. I thought of the people I had seen that night, my friends, the warmth of laughter. They felt so distant now, as though I were trapped in a nightmare where I was utterly alone. "Why are you doing this?" I stammered, fear choking my throat. "I'm just looking out for you," he replied, his tone shifting, almost reassuring. but you don't need to worry about any of that. I looked for an escape, a way out of this creeping dread clinging to me like a second skin. Before I could finish, the car lurched violently, skidding to the side of the road. I was thrown against the door, my body colliding with a harsh thud. My vision blurred as I fought to regain my composure. "You're not scared, are you?" he asked, his expression innocent yet twisted, as if he relished in my fear. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I reached for my bag, eyes darting between his face and the window. The trees seemed to lean closer, as if straining to listen to our conversation. I needed to find a way out. "Please, just let me out," I begged, my voice trembling as I turned to the door again. His laughter echoed in the silence, reverberating with malice. "But we're almost home. You shouldn't want to leave now, should you?" The weight of those words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I could feel the sweat slick on my palms, the fear pooling like ice in my stomach. I was trapped, both in this car and in his gaze, and the oppressive darkness outside felt like it was closing in on my very soul. In that moment, it became clear. This wasn't just a ride home. It was a descent into the darkness I feared most, a twisted game played by a man who knew more about me than I cared to admit. And as the shadows continued to swirl, I knew I had to find a way to escape before it was too late. The murmur of voices faded as I stepped out of the bar, the cool night air wrapping around me like a damp blanket. I fished my phone from my purse, the screen illuminating my face with a harsh, blue glow. My heart raced, not just from the alcohol, but from the nagging sensation that had lingered all night. I tapped the Uber app, ordered a ride, and leaned against the cold brick wall, lighting a cigarette to calm my nerves. As I waited, I glanced around the dimly lit streets. Shadows danced under the flickering streetlights, and that familiar feeling curled in my stomach, a mix of unease and drunken bravery. I stubbed out my cigarette just as my phone buzzed. The driver had arrived. I walked toward the idling car, a black sedan with tinted windows. As I slipped into the back seat, I caught a glimpse of the driver in the rearview mirror. He was older than I expected, maybe in his late 40s, with a heavy brow that seemed to frown even in repose. His hair was thinning, and a crooked smile flashed as I got settled. I offered a polite nod, hoping to shake off the strange sense of familiarity that prickled at the back of my mind. "Where to?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "Crescent Street, please," I replied, glancing out the window at the passing streetlights. The car rolled into motion, but instead of heading toward the main road, he turned onto a narrow side street. My stomach tightened. I felt a chill run down my spine as I watched the familiar landmarks of my neighborhood fade away, replaced by darkened alleys and vacant lots. Is there a shortcut or something?" I asked, forcing a casual tone into my voice. "I thought we were going to Crescent." He glanced at me through the mirror, a fleeting expression flickering across his face. Was it surprise or something else? "It's a nice night for a drive," he remarked, his tone too smooth, almost rehearsed. "Yeah, sure," I replied, feigning indifference. But the words felt heavy in my throat. I reached for my phone, but it remained dark, the battery dead. I felt the weight of his gaze on me, and my heart pounded harder. "You used to go to that bar a lot, didn't you?" he said, his voice laced with something unsettling. "You had the same friends every time." I blinked, caught off guard. I guess." He chuckled softly, an unnerving sound. "I'd see you there. You stood out. Always laughing." I tried to focus on my breathing, to find a rhythm that would calm my rising panic. "How long have you been driving for Uber?" I asked, hoping to steer the conversation away from myself. "Long enough," he replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. "But I remember you. You've got a certain spark." The darkness pressed in as the car wound its way through unfamiliar streets. A part of me screamed to demand he turn around, to get out and run, but I forced myself to stay calm, to think clearly. "Can you just drop me off at the next corner?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He laughed, but it didn't sound like a laugh at all, more like a growl. "You don't need to worry. I know this area well. You can trust me," he said, an exaggerated sincerity coating his words. Trust him. The phrase echoed in my mind like a cruel joke. I felt trapped, the walls of the car closing in as I imagined the countless ways this could end. The seatbelt felt suffocating. Every glance at the rearview mirror revealed the same twisted smile. "Do you remember that night?" he started, but I cut him off. "Stop the car," I insisted, my voice sharper than I intended. "I mean it. Just let me out." "Relax," he said, though there was an edge to his calm. "I'm just taking a scenic route. I promise it'll be worth it. Just stop, please." I shouted, panic surging through me. He slowed, but instead of pulling over, he turned onto an even darker road, one lined with trees that seemed to encroach upon us. My heart raced as I grasped the door handle, my body tensing with the instinct to flee. "Why are you acting this way?" he asked, his voice suddenly low and menacing. "You've always been so fun in the past." Fun. The word twisted in my gut. "You know me," I stammered, realization hitting me like a slap. "You've been watching me." He chuckled again, but this time it was full of malice. "I've seen you with your friends. Seen you alone." Dread flooded my system, a cold, clammy fear that gripped my insides. "Stop the car!" I screamed, a primal instinct kicking in as I twisted the door handle, praying it wasn't child-locked. He slammed on the brakes, the sudden stop throwing me against the seatbelt. "You don't want to do that," he hissed, his eyes darkening in the mirror. I felt the weight of every decision I had made that night crush down on me. My phone was dead, the area was deserted, and I had no one to call. My heart raced as I twisted the door handle again, and this time it opened not completely, but enough for me to feel the cool night air rush in. I didn't look back. I bolted into the darkness, the car's engine roaring to life behind me. I sprinted down the empty road, adrenaline surging as dread chased me. I could hear him yelling something, but I didn't stop to listen. I ran until the trees faded into the night, and I finally stumbled into the glow of a streetlight. Breathless, I turned to look back, my heart pounding in my ears. The car had sped off, disappearing into the shadows. But the lingering weight of his gaze haunted me, a reminder of the nightmare that clawed at the edge of my reality. I wasn't safe yet, but I had escaped. For now. Story 2, Whispers Among the Pines. The scent of pine and damp earth filled the air as I trudged deeper into the woods, the underbrush crunching beneath my boots. It was late afternoon when I set up camp, the sun still bright enough to pierce through the treetops, casting dappled shadows on the ground. I had chosen this remote spot for its solitude, far from the buzz of everyday life. It was meant to be a retreat, a chance to breathe without the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. With the tent pitched and a small fire crackling, I settled onto a log, feeling the cool breeze brush against my skin. I had packed lightly, knowing I wouldn't need much. A few snacks, a couple of books, and my trusty flashlight. The peace was welcome, and I let out a contented sigh as I took in the surroundings. It was beautiful, almost ethereal, with the sun dipping behind the mountains in a fiery display of oranges and purples. As night crept in, I fished out a small tin of beans and heated them over the fire. The warmth was comforting, a contrast to the chilling air that began to wrap around me. I'd planned to read, but the woods seemed to hum with an energy that held my attention. Shadows danced along the edges of the trees, their forms twisted and long as the daylight faded. Once the last light of day surrendered to darkness, I felt a shiver skitter down my spine. The sounds of the woods shifted. Crickets chirped, but there was a peculiar stillness that made me uneasy. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that I was merely being paranoid, but when the first whisper floated through the trees, I froze. It was faint, like a phantom brushing against my ear. I strained to listen, heart racing. "Help me," it seemed to say. I dismissed it as my imagination playing tricks. Perhaps it was the wind, or maybe a distant animal. I wrapped my arms around my knees and tried to focus on the fire, the flames crackling and popping as they devoured the wood. Hours ticked by, and the chill deepened, creeping into my bones. I picked up my flashlight, its beam piercing the darkness, and shone it into the trees, half expecting to catch a glimpse of someone or something waiting just out of sight. Nothing. As I turned back to my camp, I heard it again. "Help me." This time, clearer, more insistent. The hair on my arms stood on end. I stood abruptly, the flashlight trembling in my grip. I called out, my voice shaky, "Is someone there?" The answer was silence, thick and oppressive. I felt like prey, the hunted in a world that had suddenly turned strange. I tried to laugh it off, convincing myself it was just the echo of my mind, fantasies fueled by isolation. But when the whispers returned, closer this time, my gut twisted with dread. "Help me," it called again, a desperate plea that echoed through the trees. My name slipped from my lips involuntarily, Sarah, only to be met with an eerie stillness that settled like a blanket over the forest. In a cold sweat, I peered into the darkness beyond the firelight, trying to discern movement. The branches swayed, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure pale and flickering before it dissolved back into the shadows. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled backward, my back hitting the rough bark of a nearby tree. "Who's there?" I shouted, but my voice quivered, betraying my fear. "Sarah," the whisper came again, this time unmistakably human, yet distant as if drifting through a dream. My heart pounded violently against my rib cage. I turned and ran, abandoning my camp, the fire's glow fading rapidly behind me. Every crack of a twig beneath my foot felt like a gunshot, reverberating through the night, and I barely managed to keep my wits about me as I navigated the forest. I called out again, "Who's there?" My voice echoed through the trees, swallowed by the night. Desperation tightened in my throat, but the only reply was that whisper, now circling around me like a malevolent wind. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I stumbled, caught in a web of branches, and for a moment, I thought I heard laughter, a dark, chilling sound that sent tremors of fear down my spine. I pulled away from the branches that snagged my jacket and kept running, my breath coming in sharp gasps, each exhale a fog of panic that hung in the cool air. I reached a small clearing, the moon breaking through the clouds, illuminating the space with a ghostly light. I spun around, trying to catch my breath, but the whispers were relentless, drawing closer. "Sarah, help me." I felt the ground shift beneath me, my heart racing as I caught sight of a figure emerging from the tree-line, just at the edge of the moonlight. It was obscured, shrouded in darkness. My mind raced as I tried to comprehend what I was seeing, a mix of fear and dread paralyzing my body. "Help me, please, Sarah." The voice was familiar, like a long-forgotten echo. But as I squinted into the darkness, I realized with horror that the face I thought I recognized was warped, a nightmare dressed in the guise of someone I should know. It beckoned me, and I took a step back, breathless, my instinct screaming for me to run. Then everything went black. The second night in the woods crept in with an unsettling stillness that seemed to pulse around my camp. I had settled into my routine, stoking the fire and reheating the last of my canned chili, but unease hung like a fog in the air. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a sky bruised with indigo and violet streaks, and the world was suddenly so quiet that I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat. The first night's whispers had been easy to dismiss, just a trick of the wind, I had told myself. But tonight, the trees stood sentinel, shrouded in darkness, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. I tucked my knees against my chest, staring into the flames, and tried to ignore the chill that slithered down my spine. It started softly, like a distant murmur, a faint rustling in the underbrush that caught my attention. I strained my ears, trying to discern whether it was just the wind or something more sinister. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows that danced across the trees, and just as I thought I was being foolish, I heard it again, my name. Claire. I froze, my heart pounding in my throat. The voice was barely a whisper, yet it seemed to slice through the silence like a knife. It wasn't familiar, it was low and smooth, almost melodic, but edged with a disconcerting quality. I reminded myself that I was alone out here, miles away from civilization. It must have been a figment of my imagination, a manifestation of my own fears. But still, a cold sweat coated my brow. Claire. There it was again, clearer this time, drifting in from the thick darkness beyond the firelight. My instinct screamed at me to pack up and leave, to break camp and find the nearest path to safety, yet I remained rooted to the log I sat on, paralyzed by an inexplicable curiosity mingled with dread. Who was calling me, and why? Is someone there? I shouted, my voice shaking, cutting through the suffocating stillness. The woods swallowed my words, and in response, silence enveloped me, heavy and all-consuming. I waited for a reply, for a crack of twigs underfoot that would confirm I wasn't entirely alone, but nothing came. Just the swaying of the trees, the crackle of the fire, and the oppressive weight of my own breath. A strange impulse tugged at me, urging me to step into the shadows and follow the sound. I resisted, reminding myself of the years I spent outdoors, of the lessons on survival, the need to respect boundaries of the wild. I couldn't just wander off into the dark, not without knowing the source of that voice. Yet another whisper drifted through the air, like a wisp of smoke. Claire. This time it was directly behind me, a mere breath away, and I spun around, heart racing. The night was deep, the shadows thick, and the trees loomed like sentinels, watching, waiting. A part of me yearned to call out again, to confront whatever was lurking, but the other part, the one grounded in primal instinct, told me to stay put. Instead, I pulled my flashlight from my pack, the beam flickering to life in the oppressive darkness. I directed its glow around the clearing, illuminating the trees and the distant underbrush. Every breath I took felt labored as I scanned my surroundings, half expecting to see a figure lurching toward me from the shadows. But there was nothing, only the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves. With trembling hands, I turned out the flashlight, letting the darkness swallow me once again. I had to think. Maybe it was just an animal, some creature that had gotten too close to the firelight. I chuckled nervously at the thought, but the laughter turned sour in my throat as the memory of that voice haunted me. I couldn't shake the sensation that something was watching me, lurking just beyond the reach of the fire's glow. The night passed in a blur of sleeplessness, each rustle of leaves or snap of twigs sending adrenaline coursing through my veins. I finally collapsed in my tent, zipping myself in as if a thin layer of nylon could shield me from the darkness outside. My heart raced with wild fantasies of what might be out there, the thoughts spiraling into nightmares. I was too on edge to sleep, too terrified to close my eyes. But sleep, that dark guardian, eventually overtook me. My dreams twisted into a chaotic medley of shadows and whispers, and every time I thought I was waking up, the voice would linger, echoing among the trees. I jolted upright in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat and gasping for breath, convinced that I had heard it again, my name, sweetened with a sinister undertone. I flung open the tent flap, gripping the flashlight tighter than ever, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm as I scanned the campsite. The fire had died down to glowing embers, casting an eerie glow that barely pierced the darkness around me. The woods stood still, but I could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon me. "Who's there?" I called, voice echoing in the silence, growing stronger even as I felt my resolve start to crumble. The response came not with words, but with an abrupt rustling in the bushes to my left. I swung the light in that direction, the beam slicing through the void, and froze as my eyes caught sight of movement just beyond the tree-line. For a heartbeat, I stared into the blackness, teeth clenched, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it, the presence of something that should not have been there. Not here. Not in my sanctuary. Then, as if in answer to my fear, the voice whispered once more, softer this time, yet unmistakably clear. "Come to me, Claire." The darkness surged around me, and I felt an overwhelming urge to flee, yet a terrifying compulsion to step into the trees gripped my heart. I fought against it, retreating into the light, but the whisper wrapped around my thoughts like a vine, squeezing tighter, urging me to surrender. I had to get away. The woods weren't just alive, they were alive with something sinister. I turned and ran, heart pounding in my ears, leaving the safety of the fire behind as I stumbled into the dark. The day had waned into twilight, the sun dipping behind the trees and casting long shadows across the forest floor. I had set up my tent in a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines that stood like sentinels, guarding me against the outside world. Yet, as the light faded, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was alive in a way I had never noticed before. The air was thick with anticipation, a pulse beneath the silence. I had spent the day hiking along verdant trails, listening to the rustle of leaves and the occasional call of a distant bird. Yet now, as night began to settle in, the woods seemed to inhale deeply, holding its breath. I busied myself with a small campfire, its crackling flames a feeble defense against the encroaching darkness. I fished a can of beans from my pack and heated it over the fire, savoring the simplicity of the moment. But as I swallowed my dinner, I couldn't dismiss the creeping unease that lingered in the back of my mind. It felt as if the woods were watching me, waiting for something to happen. I leaned back against a fallen log, the warmth of the fire pushing back against the cool breeze. That was when I first heard it, a whisper, barely louder than the rustling leaves. "Is anyone there?" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Surely it was just the wind. But there it was again, faint yet unmistakable. I strained my ears, focusing on the darkness, waiting for a repeat. "Help." The voice was soft, almost a sigh, yet it carried an unearthly weight. It was not my name, but it echoed through the trees as if it sought me out. My breath quickened, and I glanced around the clearing, searching for shadows that danced just beyond the firelight. Every crack in the underbrush felt alive. The pine needles beneath my feet crunched loudly, as if announcing my presence to whatever lurked beyond the glow. I told myself it was nothing, an animal, perhaps. I convinced myself to stand, to take a step toward the woods, to confront whatever might be hiding amongst the shadows. Each step away from the warmth of the fire sent chills prickling down my spine. The whispers had ceased, but the night air seemed thicker, heavier. As I wandered deeper into the woods, the whispers returned, laced with an urgent tone. "Please, come closer." My pulse quickened. Was someone out there? I hesitated, torn between curiosity and the instinct to retreat. I called out hesitantly, my own voice trembling. "Is anyone there? Hello?" No answer came, but the whispers grew, weaving through the trees like tendrils of smoke. They seemed to echo my name now, softly, almost lovingly. "Emily, come." Chilled to the bone, I stumbled backward. I didn't care to be enticed any longer. I rushed back to the fire, the light a beacon of safety amidst the ever-thickening darkness. I sat on the log, the flames flickering wildly, casting ghoulish shadows across my face. I held my breath, listening carefully, praying the whispers would not return. But they did. This time, it felt as if they were coming from all around me. I could hear them intertwining, a cacophony of voices. "Emily, we're waiting for you." I could barely register my own thoughts amidst the rising panic. I was alone, no one should be here but me. The isolation clawed at me. I grabbed a stick from the fire, holding it out like a weapon, my heart racing with every whispered syllable. The air felt charged, as if the very fabric of the world was warping around me. The darkness shifted. I could see outlines moving among the trees, just beyond the reach of the firelight. I squinted, trying to pierce the veil of blackness, and that was when I saw him, just for a moment, a figure, half hidden behind a trunk, pale and still. My breath caught. Was this the source of the whispers? A person or something else? The reality of it sent an icy dread through my veins. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "Show yourself." But instead of an answer, the figure melted away into the foliage, swallowed by the night. I jumped to my feet, adrenaline surging through me. I could hear the rustle of leaves, branches snapping underfoot. Someone was moving in the shadows, but I couldn't see who it was. "Emily," the voice called again, softer this time, coaxing. "I'm waiting." I bolted back toward my tent, panic fueling my flight. The whispers followed me, weaving through the night like an unshakable shadow. I fumbled with the zipper, heart racing as I rushed inside, pulling the flap closed behind me. The thin fabric felt insufficient, a feeble barrier against whatever lurked outside. In the silence of the tent, the whispers quieted momentarily, as if considering their next move. I lay back on my sleeping bag, listening intently, my breath shallow. My phone flickered as I checked the time, just past midnight. I should have felt safe, cocooned in my tent, but as I lay there, I could still hear them, murmurings just outside, promising I was not alone. Staring at the ceiling of my tent, I knew I couldn't stay. I had to leave. The woods were alive with something that wasn't just the rustling leaves or creatures of the night. It was something else, cunning and patient. I felt their eyes on me, waiting for me to make my next move. As I lay there in the dark, I could only wonder who or what was truly calling my name. The oppressive weight of silence enveloped me as I sat beside the dying embers of my campfire, the scent of smoke clinging to my clothes. Night had settled in, deep and heavy, swallowing the last vestiges of daylight. Shadows danced in the trees, their shapes twisting and warping under the pale moonlight. I could hear the rhythmic chirping of crickets, a familiar sound that should have been comforting, but it only heightened the tension in the air. I had been alone in these woods for 3 days, a self-imposed retreat from the chaos of life, hoping the isolation would offer clarity. Instead, it had brought me face to face with something far more disconcerting. It started with the whispers, soft, barely audible sounds that seemed to flit through the trees like the wind. I had brushed them off as figments of my imagination, perhaps the result of too much solitude. But as night fell deeper each evening, the whispers transformed from benign murmurs into an unsettling chorus. Tonight was different. Tonight, the whispers felt deliberate, as though they were pulling me into their web. I leaned closer to the fire, its flickering light casting long shadows that danced across the ground. It was then that I heard it again, a voice that slithered through the trees, barely discernible but unmistakably calling my name. "Ella." I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. Could I have imagined that? I strained to listen, hoping it was just a trick of the wind. But no, there it was again, a chilling echo that sent shivers racing down my spine. "Ella." I felt a jolt of adrenaline. Was someone out there? I scanned the edges of the dark forest, the tree line a jagged silhouette against the night sky. No movement. Just darkness. No sign of life other than my own. Get a grip, I muttered to myself. I reached for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the shadows, revealing nothing but the same oppressive oak trees. I began to rationalize. The voices were just the echoes of my own thoughts, twisted by the solitude, the shadows of my mind playing tricks on me. Still, the instinct to flee tugged at my insides. I stood up, brushing off the dirt from my jeans, and peered into the woods, resisting the urge to call out. What would I say? Hello? My voice would disintegrate into the void, unanswered. Instead, I took a few cautious steps toward the edge of the clearing, the beam of light flickering nervously as I swept it across the darkness. Ella! The voice was clearer this time, more insistent. It seemed to come from behind the trees, a whisper that crept into my ears and settled like a weight in my chest. My heart raced, pounding against my rib cage like a caged animal desperate to escape. I felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a mix of fear and curiosity. Who's there? I shouted, my voice stronger than I felt. The sound of my own voice felt foreign and echoed back to me, swallowed by the darkness. Silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I waited, straining to hear anything: footsteps, heavy breathing, a snap of a twig. The only sound was the erratic beating of my own heart. With each passing moment, the air grew colder, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. I turned on my heel and walked back to the fire, hoping it would shield me from the growing unease gnawing at my mind. I sat down, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline. I tried to focus on the warmth, but the shadows seemed to creep closer. The whispers returned, softer now, but still unmistakably calling me. Ella! Stop it! I yelled, the sound piercing through the night. But the whispering continued, weaving around me, coming from all directions. I pressed my hands over my ears, hoping to drown out the chilling sound. I wanted to pack my things and run, to escape this oppressive atmosphere and whatever presence lurked just out of sight. But as I glanced back at my tent, a fear gripped me. If I left now, would I make it back to the trail? Would I be able to find my way through this maze of trees in the dark? The fire crackled, flinging small embers into the air like fireflies. I kept glancing behind me, convinced something was watching, waiting. I decided to stay close to the fire, to the light. As the hours dragged on, the whispers morphed into laughter, high-pitched, mocking, reverberating through the trees. The sound was so unreal, so out of place in this lifeless wilderness. I couldn't tell if it was real or merely a figment of my imagination spiraling out of control. I was losing my grip on reality, and the thought terrified me. Then, just as I was about to convince myself to run, the laughter stopped. A profound silence fell over the woods, even the crickets seemed to hold their breath. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out all other sounds. I turned slowly, scanning the trees, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. That's when I saw it, a figure standing just beyond the tree line, shrouded in shadows, watching me. I couldn't make out any features, but I felt its gaze, cold and piercing. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet as panic surged through me. Who are you? I managed to croak, my voice a whisper now, trembling with fear. But I was met with silence. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It simply watched, the darkness swallowing it whole. I took another step back, the heat of the fire no longer comforting but suffocating. Ella, the voice, now distinctly male, reached out to me again and again, echoing through the trees. I turned on my heels and ran. The moon hung high and pale in the sky, drowning the woods in an eerie silver glow. Each gust of wind seemed to carry whispers that curled around the trees like tendrils of smoke. I had always thought of myself as a strong, independent woman, someone who thrived in solitude, but as night settled over my campsite, the palpable tension in the air made me question my resolve. The fire crackled beside me, its flickering light a meager defense against the encroaching darkness. I sat there, staring into the flames, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. It had been a few nights since I first heard the whispers. They came to me in the dead of night, soft and indistinguishable, a gentle rustle in the leaves that sent chills racing down my spine. It felt like they were calling my name, teasing me from beyond the shadows. I wrapped my arms around my knees, drawing them close to my chest. The forest was supposed to be my refuge, a place of peace where I could escape the relentless chaos of daily life. But now, with the whispers growing louder and more insistent, that tranquility had morphed into something sinister. Desperate to distract myself, I grabbed my flashlight and decided to take a stroll around my campsite. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. The trees loomed like towering giants, their branches stretching out like fingers in the dim light. I stepped carefully, each crunch of twigs underfoot seeming deafening in the stillness. I called out, half-heartedly teasing the darkness, "Hello? Is anyone out there?" The words felt foolish on my tongue, the echo of silence a mocking reply. As I wandered deeper into the woods, the whispers slithered back into my consciousness, beckoning me as if they were right behind me. I turned abruptly, shining the flashlight into the darkness, revealing nothing but the daunting silhouettes of trees. My heart raced, the hairs on my arms prickled. I had ventured too far from the safety of my fire. Then, distinct and clear, I heard it again, a voice, faint yet undeniably real. "Sarah." It was so close I felt as though the breath of whoever spoke was lingering on my neck. A shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't just my imagination. Someone was out there. I turned and sprinted back toward my campsite, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly, illuminating the chaos of branches and shadows. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, drowning out everything else. When I reached my tent, I jumped inside, zipping the flap shut behind me. Darkness enveloped me, and I leaned against the cold fabric of the tent, trying to catch my breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The whispers faded, but the tension remained, thick and suffocating. After a few moments, I mustered the courage to peer out through a small opening. The light from the fire flickered weakly, casting elongated shadows that danced in the trees. I held my breath, feeling the weight of silence pressing down on me. Then, a twig snapped outside. I froze, straining to hear. The whispers returned, only this time they were clearer, almost urgent. "Sarah, come out." I clutched my flashlight to my chest, the cold metal grounding me in reality. I wanted to ignore it, to convince myself it was just the wind, but the voice was so familiar. It carried an unsettling warmth that sent my mind racing. Who could it be? Suddenly, I remembered the hiker I'd met on the trail 2 days ago. David, that was his name. He had seemed harmless, a fellow enthusiast of the wild, but had he followed me? Did he still believe I was lost in these woods? "Sarah," the voice sounded again, but it wasn't David's. It was softer, more melodic, as if it were woven from the very fabric of the forest. I pressed my fingers against my lips, fighting back a scream, my thoughts clouded with dread. What did it want? Come out? I could almost hear the mocking laughter hidden in the whisper. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I wondered if I should confront the voice or stay hidden. I decided to remain still, but my curiosity gnawed at me. The fire was dying, its warmth fading like my courage, and the shadows pressed closer. The whispers grew impatient, swirling outside my tent like a tempest. "Sarah, come to us." The invitation was tinged with an unsettling excitement. I couldn't stay cooped up forever. Drawing a shaky breath, I grabbed my flashlight again, resolved to confront whatever lurked outside. Cautiously, I unzipped the flap of my tent, wincing as the sound echoed in the silence. The moonlight flooded in, revealing the clearing, but no one was there. The fire fizzled, the embers glowing like dying stars. I stepped out into the open, scanning the darkness for movement, my heart thundering in my chest. "David? Is that you?" I called out, hoping to drown the fear with familiarity. No answer. Just the rustle of leaves, the whisper of the wind, and then there it was again, the voice. "Sarah." It felt closer now, wrapping around me like a cloak, as if the woods themselves had come to life. I backed away, heart racing, feeling the weight of eyes on me from every direction. The trees swayed gently, their branches creaking as shadows morphed and shifted. I turned and ran back into the tent, zipping the flap tightly. As I huddled there, shaking, I realized the whispers had stopped, replaced by a chilling silence. But as I sat in the dark, I knew that whatever had called my name was still out there, waiting, watching from the depths of the woods. I was now alone, and I could hear it breathing. Story 3: Echoes of Midnight. The fluorescent lights flickered above me, casting a ghastly glow in the dimly lit corridor of St. Mary's Hospital. It was just past midnight, and the muted sounds of machinery and the distant beeping of monitors punctuated the otherwise eerie silence. It was my third night shift in a row, and fatigue hung heavy on my eyelids, threatening to pull me into a restless sleep. But the patients needed me, someone had to keep watch. As I shuffled past room 201, the door creaked open. I was greeted by the soft murmur of Mrs. Patterson, a sweet old lady who had been recovering from a hip replacement. Her voice, frail yet comforting, floated into the corridor. "Nurse Clara, is that you?" "Yes, Mrs. Patterson," I replied, stepping inside. "How are you feeling tonight?" Like an old lady, she chuckled softly, a twinkle in her eye despite her frailty. "But I'm glad you're here. You always seem to brighten up this place." I smiled, grateful for the compliment. I checked her vitals and adjusted the blanket that had slipped down. "You have a visitor on Thursday, right? Your granddaughter?" "Yes, little Emma," she exclaimed, her eyes lighting up at the mention of her family. I made a mental note to remind her about the flowers I had promised to bring. After ensuring Mrs. Patterson was comfortable, I headed back to the nurse's station, the rhythmic squeaking of my shoes echoing in the hallway. As I sorted through the patient files, something caught my eye, a folded note tucked between the pages of Mr. Hargrove's chart. My heart quickened. It wasn't unusual for family members to leave messages, but this felt off. I slid the note out, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. The paper was yellowed and worn, as if it had been passed around many times before. The words were scrawled in uneven handwriting. "You shouldn't have told them about your childhood. They won't forget." A chill coursed through me. It felt personal, almost accusatory. Who had left this? I quickly shoved the note back into the file, trying to dismiss it as a prank. It could be some sick joke, I told myself. Still, unease settled in the pit of my stomach, and I shook my head, forcing myself to focus on my duties. The night wore on slowly, each hour blending into the next, punctuated by the occasional scuffle of feet in the hallway or the muted sounds of a distant TV in another room. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It gnawed at me, a feeling so palpable I almost expected to turn around and find someone lurking in the shadows. Around 3 in the morning, I took a break in the staff lounge, hoping to find some semblance of normalcy in a cup of lukewarm coffee. Instead, I found another note, this time lying on the table, as if it had been placed there deliberately. I held my breath, the anxiety practically choking me. The handwriting was the same. "Your keys were left in the locker. You may want to check them." I felt the blood drain from my face. I hadn't told anyone I had misplaced my keys earlier. No one should have known. I glanced toward the door, half expecting to see a figure disappearing down the hallway. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like a cornered animal. I clenched my fists, rising to my feet. This had to stop. Someone, somewhere, was playing a cruel game, and I was the unwitting participant. I decided to confront the issue head-on. I would notify my supervisor in the morning and maybe even the security team. Until then, I had to stay vigilant. The night morphed into a blur of duties and increasing dread. I busied myself with other patients, but the gnawing suspicion never left me. Every room I entered felt like a stage where I was both the performer and the audience, the only witness to my creeping paranoia. When I returned to the nurse's station, ready to check the notes once more, I found the third note, this time taped to the computer screen. It's easy to forget, but they remember everything. You'll see. I felt my pulse quicken. This was no joke, this was something deeply unsettling. I felt my thoughts locking onto a singular obsession. Who could be doing this? I glanced around the station, but aside from the muted glow of the monitors, there was no sign of life. I felt utterly alone. The rest of my shift dragged on, the clocks ticking echoing the anxious beat of my heart. I kept expecting to find someone, anyone, lurking in the shadows, but the halls remained empty. The lights continued to hum a familiar tune, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were whispering secrets about me, secrets I didn't want to hear. By the time dawn broke and the first rays of light slipped through the curtains, I was beyond exhausted. My mind was a jumbled mess, racing at a speed I could hardly comprehend. It was time to speak up, to put an end to this madness, and as I walked toward my supervisor, I felt the weight of the notes in my pocket, a heavy reminder that I was now alone in this hospital. But as I opened my mouth to speak, I caught the flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. I turned, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure disappearing around the corner, just a shadow, but it sent chills down my spine. The night shift had drifted into a surreal haze. I stood behind the nurse's station, feigning indifference as I scanned the dimly lit corridors of the hospital. The fluorescent lights flickered sporadically, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. I had grown accustomed to the silence, but tonight it seemed to smother me like a heavy blanket. The clock ticked steadily, each second feeling like an eternity. Midnight had come and gone, and I still had hours left until dawn. My shift began with the usual routine, checking vitals, administering medications, and reassuring anxious patients. It was familiar, comforting, almost like a lullaby to my weary mind. Yet, tonight, something felt different. I had found a note earlier. It had been tucked inside the chart of Mr. Emerson, a patient in room 306. The cramped space smelled of antiseptic and sweat, and I could taste the sourness of fear as I read the note in the gloom of the room. You always take your break at 2 a.m. The handwriting was jagged and uneven, the words dripping with an unsettling familiarity. I had brushed it off at first, rationalizing that it was likely a prank or a misguided employee's joke. I wanted to laugh it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. A chill ran down my spine as I thought of that note, and the unsettling knowledge that someone knew my schedule. Hours slipped by, the hospital's ambient sounds becoming a backdrop to my racing thoughts. I tried to focus on my patients, ensuring they were comfortable and medicated. But now, every time I entered a room, I felt the weight of unseen eyes on my back. The eerie quietness of the hallways amplified the feeling, and shadows twisted into threatening shapes just beyond the corner of my vision. As I made my rounds, I decided to check on Mr. Emerson again. He was a grizzled man with a penchant for storytelling, though his eyes often betrayed a deep-seated fear. When I pushed open his door, the flickering light cast an ominous glow across his bed. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling. "Mr. Emerson?" I called, attempting to sound cheerful. "How are you feeling?" His gaze shifted slowly toward me, his expression unreadable. "There's someone in this hospital," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I see them at night. I felt my breath hitch in my throat. What do you mean? What do you see? He closed his eyes tightly, as if trying to block something out. I can't explain it, he said. But I know they watch you. They know everything. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I forced a smile, trying to brush off his words. You're just tired, Mr. Emerson. Let's get you a little sedative. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. Don't trust the shadows, nurse. They know more than you think. His warning echoed in my mind as I resumed my rounds, an oppressive silence enveloping me like a shroud. I could still feel the heaviness of his gaze on my back as I exited. I tried to shake off the ominous words, but darkness clung to me like a second skin. Later, as I returned to the nurse's station, I found another note awaiting me, this time in the file of Mrs. Lang, a sweet older woman in room 202. It read, "You hate the blood draws, but you do them anyway." The words felt like a personal invasion, and I recoiled, retreating into the narrow corridor. I pressed my back against the cool wall, the sensation grounding me as I focused on my breathing. The world around me felt as if it had tilted on its axis. Who was doing this? An employee? A patient? The paranoia settled in, thick and suffocating. I glanced at the empty chairs lining the waiting room, shadows pooling in their corners. The clock chimed ominously. I had less than 2 hours left, but dread gnawed at my insides. I knew I should call the supervisor, report these bizarre occurrences, but something stopped me. What would I say? That I was being stalked by an invisible entity? How would that sound? Just then, I heard a soft rustle behind me. I turned sharply, heart racing. The corridor was empty, devoid of life. I shook my head, convincing myself it was just my overactive mind playing tricks. With every passing minute, the notes haunted me. I became hyper-aware of my movements. Each time I walked past a room, I imagined someone lurking behind the glass, pen in hand, plotting my routine like a twisted game. I darted my eyes around the station, searching for something, anything that could provide some explanation. The last hour was a blur. I rescheduled my rounds, moving in rapid bursts, checking on patients, but I felt more frantic than helpful. The shadows morphed into menacing figures in my mind, and I could no longer distinguish between the tangible and the imagined. The fluorescent lights flickered again, and the power surged just as a loud crash echoed from the utility closet down the hallway. I hesitated, a cold sweat trickling down my spine. After a moment's indecision, I decided to investigate. As I approached the door, the air grew heavy, laden with a sense of impending doom. I pushed it open, the hinges creaking ominously. The room was dark, the only light spilling from the corridor behind me. Boxes lay strewn across the floor, but no one was there. I stepped back, heart hammering in my chest. The shadows danced more wildly here, and I could feel the air grow colder. Then I spotted it, a third note, lying innocuously on the floor beside a fallen box. With trembling hands, I picked it up, my breath hitching as I read the words, "You should have listened." The chill of realization washed over me, and the shadows seemed to deepen. I was now alone. Someone was watching me. I turned to flee, the weight of dread pulling me back, but I had to get away. I raced down the corridor, the sound of my shoes echoing against the cold tiles, the ghostly whispers of the night shift cascading around me like a warning. I could feel eyes upon me, a presence lurking in the dark. As I reached the nurse's station, I glanced back one last time, hoping to find nothing but the empty hallways. But I knew the truth now. I was not just a nurse in a dimly lit hospital. I was prey, and something was hunting me through the shadows. The second week of my night shifts began with an unsettling chill that settled deep in my bones. I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders as I strolled through the dimly lit corridors of Alderwood General, the fluorescent lights flickering occasionally like fading stars. The hospital had an unnatural quiet to it at night, a silence that felt as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to break it. I had grown used to the beeping of machines and the distant echo of footsteps, but tonight was different. Tonight, the air felt thick with unease. It started with a note. I had been organizing a patient's file when I caught a glimpse of a folded piece of paper peeking out from between the pages. I pulled it out, my heart racing as I unfolded it, expecting the worst. The handwriting was neat and precise, each letter crafted as if the writer had taken great care over it. You always arrive at 8. The patients like your smile. My stomach dropped. How could anyone know about my routine, my morning ritual of brewing coffee before the chaos of the night began? I glanced around the deserted nurses' station, half expecting to see someone lurking behind the shadows. But only the quiet hum of the machines accompanied me. I had dismissed the notes as a prank, perhaps an attempt to get a rise out of the new girl. Yet, the way they described my interactions with the patients, how I always joked with Mrs. Daniels about her awful taste in tea, or how I had taken time to admire Mr. Hargrove's collection of model airplanes, sent a shiver down my spine. I crumpled the note in my fist, resolving to ignore it. Convinced it was just a sick joke, I focused on my tasks for the night, charting vital signs, changing bandages, and dispelling the occasional restless spirit of someone too scared to sleep. But as I moved from room to room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The sensation prickled at the back of my neck, a whisper of paranoia that I tried desperately to shove aside. On the third night of my shift, I found another note. This time it was tucked into the file of a new admission, a young woman named Clara who had been brought in after a car accident. You should check on Clara. She's scared and alone, just like you. My pulse quickened. Who was this person? I glanced around the room, but the corridors remained empty, the shadows shifting as if they had a mind of their own. I quickly left the nurse's station, heading to Clara's room, desperate for a distraction. She lay in the bed, pale and fragile. I could see the bruises marring her skin, a patchwork of darkness against her delicate features. I introduced myself, trying to mask my dread with a smile. "How are you feeling?" I asked, my voice steadier than my heart. She blinked slowly, her gaze unfocused. "Scared," she admitted. "I don't remember what happened. I just woke up here." I nodded, reassuring her as best as I could. I checked her Ford drip, made notes in her chart, and tried to engage her in conversation. But the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. It was as if the walls themselves were listening, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing with secrets. The notes continued to come, each one more invasive than the last. "You like the way the moonlight filters through the windows. It's beautiful, isn't it?" It was true that I often found solace in the way the soft light illuminated the rooms, but how could someone know that? I began to look over my shoulder, half expecting to find a pair of eyes peering through the glass, witnessing my every move. One night, as I was filling out paperwork, I felt a presence behind me. I turned abruptly, heart hammering, but the hallway was empty. I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the dread. Maybe I was just tired. The fatigue of long shifts had begun to wear on me, making shadows seem deeper and corners darker. But as I walked past the break room, I caught sight of a figure standing by the vending machine. I paused, squinting into the dim light. It was just a fellow nurse, Kelly. I let out a sigh of relief, watching her rummage through coins as she tapped her foot impatiently. I approached her, determined to distract myself. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She nodded but glanced up at me, concern etched on her face. "You've been looking a bit jumpy lately," she said. You sure you're all right? Just tired, I replied, forcing a smile. You know how it is on night shifts. As I turned to leave, a fleeting glance at the clock revealed I still had hours left. I felt the weight of the notes, like stones in my pocket, dragging me down. Later that night, after my shift ended, I found myself unable to leave. I lingered in the break room, staring at the walls, convinced they held answers I couldn't see. The following evening, I found another note, this time hidden in the break room. You're always so brave. But courage can be lonely. My hands trembled as I read the words. Who was doing this? I felt trapped in a web of uncertainty, the threads pulling tighter with each note. As the week wore on, I began to dread my shifts. I could no longer tell where the shadows ended and the reality began. The notes became an extension of my day-to-day existence, each one amplifying my fear. And just when I thought I couldn't feel more isolated, I discovered the truth. Someone was watching me, and I had no idea who it was or what they wanted. I could feel the darkness creeping in around the edges of my mind, the paranoia festering like an untreated wound. I had to find answers before I lost myself entirely to this nightmare. But how could I dig through the shadows when they seemed to be swallowing me whole? The night was far from over. The fluorescent lights flickered in the corridor, casting a pale, sickly glow that sent shivers down my spine. Each night, the same eerie rhythm pulsed through the hospital, a mixture of the buzzing bolts and the muted whispers of distant machinery. I had grown accustomed to the quiet, the stillness of the empty rooms, but since starting the night shift alone, the silence had morphed into something suffocating. After discovering the first note tucked between the pages of Mrs. Hastings' file, I convinced myself it was a prank. The second one, hidden within Mr. Jensen's chart, felt a little too personal. Now, I was staring at the third note, folded neatly inside a child's patient file. 3 o'clock. You're always there. I had been looking after a young boy named Oliver, a sweet child battling pneumonia. I found myself drawn to him. His laughter, though faint, was like a soft light in the gloom of the hospital. I had just administered his medication and settled into my routine, but the note burned in my pocket. I felt its presence like a weight dragging me into despair, each word echoing in my mind. The clock ticked steadily, and each tick felt like a countdown. My heart raced as I tried to push the thought of who could be watching me deep down into the recesses of my mind. After all, this was a hospital. Surely, it could be anyone, an overzealous colleague, perhaps, teasing me with some kind of twisted game. Still, I found myself glancing over my shoulder more frequently, as if the halls themselves were breathing, watching, waiting. I decided to take a moment to compose myself. I entered the break room, its fluorescent lights buzzing mercilessly overhead. I poured myself a cup of lukewarm coffee, the bitter taste more a distraction than a comfort. As I leaned against the counter, staring out the small window that overlooked the dimly lit parking lot, I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head. The notes could be harmless, even if they were unsettling. But then I remembered the way they had come to me, a sharp reminder that someone was aware of my every move. After a few minutes of forced calm, I stepped back out into the corridor, taking one last sip of coffee before discarding the cup. The air felt heavier now. I worked my way back toward Oliver's room, my footsteps echoing ominously against the tiled floor. As I approached, I heard rustling inside. My heart sank. I knocked lightly on the door, pushing it open. Oliver? It's Nurse Sarah. The room was dim, save for the weak light from the monitor beside his bed. Oliver lay nestled in his blankets, his small frame dwarfed by the hospital sheets. But he wasn't alone. A figure hunched over the bed, whispering softly, too softly for me to decipher. I felt the blood drain from my face when the figure turned towards me, and I was met with the gaunt features of a man I did not recognize. Panic flared in my chest. Who are you? I demanded, stepping further into the room. The man blinked slowly, and for a moment, I thought I caught a flicker of recognition in his eyes. But it vanished just as quickly, replaced by a blank stare. "I'm just here to see Oliver," he replied, his voice eerily calm. "Visiting hours are over," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "You need to leave." He didn't move. Instead, he looked at Oliver, then back at me. "You're always here at 3 o'clock. Every time." My stomach turned, bile rising to the back of my throat. "Get out." The man raised his hands in mock surrender. All right. I'm leaving." He stepped back towards the door but lingered for a moment, his eyes boring into mine. "Just remember, Sarah, you're not alone. Someone's always watching." There was something unsettling about the way he said my name, as if he knew me. I felt rooted to the spot as he slipped out of the room, his words clawing at the edges of my sanity. I rushed to the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of him in the hallway, but he had vanished. I leaned against the window, the cold glass grounding me momentarily. I needed to check on Oliver. I turned to him, but his eyes were closed, his face pale and drawn. "Oliver?" I whispered, but there was no response. "Sarah?" A voice broke through my panic. It was Dr. Matthews, his brow furrowing in concern. "What's wrong?" I tried to shake off my fear, but the image of the man lingered in my mind. I found someone in here. He said he was here to see Oliver, but it's past visiting hours." Dr. Matthews frowned, stepping further into the room. "Did you call security?" "No," I admitted, my heart still racing. "Let's check the logs," he instructed, stepping out of the room. I followed closely behind, still feeling the remnants of dread settle in my bones. We reached the nurse's station, and Dr. Matthews immediately began riffling through the visitor records. "There's no entry for anyone visiting Oliver tonight," he said, his voice laced with disbelief. "Are you sure you saw someone?" I nodded, frantic. "He was just in there, I swear." Dr. Matthews continued to search, his fingers gliding over the keyboard. "I believe you, but there's nothing here. I'll have a security detail patrol the floor." I nodded, but a sinking feeling gripped me. The notes, the man, everything was merging into a terrifying reality I couldn't escape. I wanted to flee, to run from the shadows creeping ever closer in the corners of my mind. But I had a duty. As I stood there, the realization hit me I couldn't remain in this hospital, alone in the dark. Whoever was watching me had already breached my sanctuary, and the feeling of being unsettled had morphed into outright terror. Every face, every sound, everything felt like a potential threat. I looked up at Dr. Matthews, my resolve hardening. "I need to leave. Now!" The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a dull, mechanical drone as I navigated the long, sterile corridor of the hospital. Shadows danced across the pale walls, shifting with my every step. I could feel the weight of the silence bearing down on me, more oppressive than it had ever been during my long nights on duty. Each flicker of the lights cast looming shapes, making the hospital feel less like a place of healing and more like a trap. The notes began to escalate. The first had felt like a cruel joke, a hastily scrawled message, tucked beneath a patient's chart, detailing my morning routine. "You always check on room 314 first." I brushed it off as a prank. But with each subsequent note, the chill of unease crept deeper into my bones. "Your favorite coffee is dark roast. You take it black." That one had sent a pulse of fear through me. Who had been watching me so closely? My heart raced as I recalled the moments I had spent alone, sipping coffee in the break room, barely aware of the time slipping by. I had thought of reporting it, but the last time I confided in a colleague about my concerns, I had been met with eye rolls and shrugs. People are just trying to mess with you, they said, dismissing my growing paranoia. But it wasn't just childish pranks. I felt eyes on me, the sensation creeping up my spine like icy fingers. As I walked to room 312 to check on Mrs. Hawkins, an elderly woman who had been admitted for respiratory issues, I thought I heard something behind me, soft but distinct, like the shuffle of shoes against the linoleum floor. I turned suddenly, my heart thudding loudly in my chest, but the corridor lay empty. Just the quiet hum of the hospital machines and the ghost of my own breath. I entered room 312 and checked Mrs. Hawkins's vitals. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor punctuated the stillness, a reminder of life clinging to its fragile thread. She stirred slightly, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of comfort in my role as a caregiver. But as I prepared to write my notes, the familiar tingle of dread returned. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer just a nurse. I had become a target. After I finished my rounds, I retreated to the nurse's station, the dim glow of the monitor offering a semblance of security. I slid the latest note from my pocket, a crude piece of paper folded in half. "You have a nice laugh." I hear it from the other rooms. I gripped it tightly, knuckles white, as if I could crush the words through sheer force of will. The clock ticked loudly, each second echoing like a drumbeat, and I found myself glancing toward the door, half expecting to see someone step through the frame. I wondered, not for the first time, if I should simply leave. But something kept me rooted to the spot, a stubborn defiance, perhaps, or the flickering hope that I could find the one behind these notes. Around midnight, the hospital fell into an even deeper silence. I wandered briefly from the nurse's station to the break room, seeking a moment of reprieve. As I poured a cup of coffee, the steam swirled around me, obscuring my reflection in the window. I turned my gaze to the glass, suddenly aware of the weight of my own shadow, the way it blended into the dimly lit corner of the room. In that moment, I resolved to confront my fears. I returned to the nurse's station and rifled through the patient files, hoping for a clue, a slip-up, a name, anything that could lead me to the person watching me. Hours passed, and I felt the fatigue of the night settling heavily on my shoulders. The notes had become my obsession, eclipsing everything else. Just as I was about to give in to exhaustion, I came across an anomaly in the records, a series of repeated admissions for a patient named Ethan Blake. He had come in 5 times over the last year, each time for minor issues, kidney stones, a broken wrist, an asthma attack. But there was something unsettling about the frequency, like a deliberate invitation to observe. I made a mental note to look deeper into his file, but a sudden noise shattered my focus, a soft knock at the nurse's station. My heart raced as I turned, my breath catching in my throat. It was a figure cloaked in shadows, just beyond the reach of the flickering light. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. The figure stepped closer, and I could finally make out a face. It was Stephen, one of the night orderlies, his expression unreadable. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, a hint of concern in his voice. "Just tired," I replied, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. "How's your shift going?" Same old, same old. But I saw you looking through those files." "Everything okay?" I hesitated. I couldn't involve him, not yet. "Yeah, just routine stuff." "All right, just checking in." He lingered a moment longer before walking away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. My resolve faltered. I wondered if I could trust anyone here. The hospital had turned into a labyrinth of uncertainty, and I was losing my sense of direction. As I returned to my search, the faint sound of paper rustling caught my attention. I turned and saw another note slipped under the edge of the counter, a new one, waiting for me as if it had been placed deliberately. Trembling slightly, I picked it up. "You shouldn't be looking into this. You won't like what you find." A wave of nausea rolled through me. The feeling of being watched became palpable, the shadows stretching and contracting as if alive. I backed away from the counter, unsure of what to do next. The walls felt like they were closing in, and I realized with a sinking dread that I had unwittingly stirred something far darker than I had anticipated. Somebody was out there, and they were watching me. Story 4, Shadow at the Station. Chapter 1. Chapter 1. I had expected the station to be bustling, a hive of travelers, all moving with purpose. Instead, when I arrived at the Yorkton train station, a heavy silence enveloped me, seeping into my bones. It was late, and the sun had long disappeared, leaving shadows to stretch and twist beneath the flickering fluorescent lights. My heart sank as I checked my watch, its hands stubbornly refusing to reverse the time. I had missed the last train home. Shuffling my feet, I glanced around. The platforms yawned into darkness, the only sounds the distant echo of my steps and the rhythmic ticking of the clock overhead. Anxiety tightened around my chest. I felt exposed, like a solitary leaf swirling in a storm. I wondered if I could summon an Uber, if any driver would dare navigate this desolate locale at this hour. I pulled out my phone, but the lack of signal only deepened my sense of isolation. With no other options, I took a deep breath and walked toward the nearest waiting area, hoping to find a bench and plan my next move. The air was stale, carrying the faint odor of cleaning supplies mixed with something indefinable that set my nerves on edge. I settled onto a bench, scanning the platforms for signs of life. Then, at the far end, I saw him. A man, standing alone on platform 3, his figure obscured by the mist creeping through the night. He wore a dark coat that seemed to blend with the shadows, his face partially hidden beneath the brim of a worn hat. I could feel his gaze, even from such a distance, like an electric current crawling across my skin. I quickly looked away, convincing myself it was my imagination playing tricks. Minutes stretched, stillness thickening around me, when I finally summoned the courage to glance back. The man was gone. I exhaled softly, relief washing over me, but it was short-lived. The clock ticked insistently, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Just as I was about to close my eyes and lull away the rising dread, a sudden movement caught my eye. I turned, and there he was again, now standing on platform 1. How had he crossed the distance so quickly? My heart raced, pounding against my ribcage as I squinted through the dim light. He didn't seem to be waiting for a train, he was just waiting. I forced myself to stay calm, convincing myself that it was merely a coincidence, that perhaps he was as lost as I was. But my instinct screamed otherwise. He was staring at me. I felt exposed under his gaze, as if the shadows were tightening around me like a noose. I stood up, pacing the platform, anxiety coiling tighter with every step. I started toward the exit, but before I could reach it, I heard a sudden noise, a soft shuffle of shoes against the concrete. I turned, and there he was again, even closer now, standing at the edge of platform 2. His posture remained still, but something in his demeanor felt predatory, as if he were a wolf watching a stray lamb. "Hello?" I called out, my voice quivering. The echo felt foreign in the vast emptiness. No response came, only the oppressive silence that seemed to close in around me. I backed away from the edge of the platforms, my instinct screaming to flee. But where would I go? I felt trapped in this labyrinth of concrete and metal, each platform a prison, each shadow a potential threat. I glanced at the digital sign overhead, the words flickering in and out like a dying star, "Next train, 4:45 a.m. It was still hours away, and I didn't know if I could last that long. I looked back to platform 3, but he was gone again. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Perhaps he had followed me. Perhaps he was already inside the building, lurking just behind a wall, waiting for the right moment to strike. The air felt charged, every nerve ending in my body alight with fear. I realized I had to get out. I made my move toward the exit, my feet pounding against the concrete with a frantic rhythm. But just as I reached the door, I felt the unmistakable pressure of eyes on me again. I turned, and my heart dropped. He was on platform 1 once more, closer this time, his shadow stretching unnaturally long. He tilted his head, almost curiously, as if gauging my next move. A chill raced down my spine. It was as if he were toying with me, pulling the strings of a cruel game I had never agreed to play. Panic surged. I stumbled backward, my hand brushing against the cold metal of the door frame. I needed to get out of there, to escape this silent predator and the confines of this accursed station. Yet, something held me there, a morbid fascination with the fear that had rooted itself deep within me. I took a step back, then another, my breath coming in shallow bursts. "Leave me alone," I shouted, the words echoing hollowly in the empty station. He didn't respond. Instead, he merely stood there, watching, waiting as if he relished every fleeting moment of my terror. With one final glance, I turned and bolted for the exit, the darkness behind me swallowing the light and leaving me with only the sound of my pounding heart and the distant chime of that cursed clock. But as I burst through the door into the cold night air, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped at all. He was still there, lurking, a shadowy presence that would haunt me long after I left. The door slammed behind me, but I knew that the true nightmare had only just begun. I had never considered myself particularly superstitious, but after missing the last train that evening, I felt an unsettling chill settle over me, brushing against the nape of my neck. The station loomed ahead, its once bustling atmosphere now a hollow echo of its former self. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting a pallid glow over the cracked tiles and faded advertisements peeling from the walls. A muffled voice echoed in the distance, announcing an arrival that would never come. As I stepped deeper into the station, the clack of my heels against the cold tiles seemed to amplify the silence. I pulled my coat tighter around me, a futile attempt to ward off the chill creeping into my bones. The waiting area was deserted, save for the occasional scurry of a rat slipping into the shadows. I sensed an unsettling quiet that draped over the station like a shroud. I glanced at my watch again, its hands mocking me with their slow, unyielding march. The last train had left over an hour ago, and my phone had succumbed to a dead battery, leaving me with no way to call for help or check for taxis. My heart raced as I scoured the timetables posted on the wall, searching for any sign of hope. It was then that I noticed him, a figure standing at the far end of the platform. He wore a long, dark coat that seemed to absorb the dim light around him. His face was obscured, but I felt his gaze pierce through the distance, locking onto mine. I swallowed hard, an involuntary shiver running down my spine. Who was he? And why was he staring? I blinked, and in that instant, he vanished, as if the shadows had swallowed him whole. The sudden absence of his presence left me feeling more vulnerable, as if his disappearance had stripped the last layer of safety from the station. I hesitated, my mind racing with the possibilities of where he could have gone. I turned back to the timetables, desperately trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. Minutes ticked by as I paced the waiting area, anxiety clawing at my insides. I thought about walking toward the exit, but something kept me rooted in place. Just as I was about to take a step, I caught a flicker of movement to my right. I spun around to find him again, only this time he was closer, standing at another platform, seemingly waiting for something, perhaps for me. I squinted, trying to discern any detail about his features. But darkness obscured everything, save for the glint of his eyes catching the light. My breath quickened. I could feel the heat rising in my chest. Panic began to swirl within me. What did he want? Why wouldn't he just leave? In a moment of stubbornness, I willed myself to approach him, to confront whatever this stranger was. The echo of my footsteps grew louder as I drew closer, the air growing thicker with dread. With each step, I tried to convince myself he was simply another stranded commuter, just as lost as I was. But the closer I got, the more I felt a primal sense of fear well up inside. When I reached the platform, he was gone again. The emptiness around me was oppressive, and I cursed myself for being so foolish. I turned back to the main concourse, heart pounding in my ears. I felt like a mouse in a maze, and the walls were closing in. Just as I was about to dart for the exit, I heard a voice deep and gravelly shatter the stillness. "You shouldn't be here at this hour." My blood ran cold. It was him, standing at the edge of the platform where I had just been. "What do you want?" I managed to stammer, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Just to talk," he replied, stepping closer. The flickering lights caught his face for a brief moment, and I was struck by the emptiness in his eyes. It was as if there was nothing behind those deep-set sockets, just void staring back at me. I took a step back, fear propelling me. "Stay away from me," I shouted, the urgency in my voice echoing against the walls. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled a slow, unsettling grin. "You're all alone here, you know. No one will hear you." I turned on my heels and dashed back toward the waiting room, adrenaline coursing through my veins. My thoughts were a frantic blur. I felt like a rabbit fleeing a predator, and the station transformed into a labyrinth designed to trap me. I raced toward the emergency exit, yet every corridor seemed to lead me in circles. Behind me, I heard the click of heels against tiles. The sound was unmistakable. He was following me. I quickened my pace, heart pounding in my chest, desperate to escape his grasp. The fluorescent lights buzzed angrily above me, and I cursed them for their inconsistency. I needed to get out, needed to scream, but the silence in the station was deafening. As I burst into the next platform, I looked back to see if he was still there. To my horror, he stood just a few feet away, an unbroken distance that made the air feel thick around us. "You can't run forever," he taunted, his voice low and resonant in the hollow space. The thought of being cornered sent a jolt of panic through me. I turned away, desperate for a way out, but the station twisted around me, every exit seeming to lead deeper into his territory. I could feel dread curling around my throat like a vice, constricting with each breath. In that moment of despair, I realized I was not just running from him. I was running from the very idea of being trapped in a place that should have been filled with people, filled with safety, now transformed into a prison. I staggered forward, searching for an escape, my mind racing with thoughts of what it meant to truly be alone. The only sound that echoed in the stillness was the rhythm of my heart, pounding relentlessly against the encroaching darkness. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, their hum punctuating the stillness of the deserted train station. I leaned against the cool metal bench, my breath visible in the cold night air, feeling more trapped than I had moments ago. The last train had pulled away nearly an hour ago, leaving me with nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in the cavernous space. I had tried calling for a cab, but my cell had died just after I'd realized I had missed my train. I couldn't shake the growing dread that settled over me as the minutes turned into what felt like hours. I shifted my weight, rubbing my arms to ward off the chill, and glanced at the clock. It was 11:15. My mind raced with thoughts of how I would get home, but every plan seemed futile in the face of the oppressive quiet. Then, there he was again. The man stood at the far end of platform 2, his silhouette stark against the harsh lighting. At first, I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. My eyes had to be deceiving me in this empty place, but he looked exactly like the figure I had seen earlier. He was dressed in a dark coat, buttoned up to the collar, and a fedora that cast a shadow across his face. I couldn't discern his features, but the way he seemed to shift his gaze toward me sent chills racing down my spine. I forced myself to look away, focusing instead on the flickering light as I tried to calm the growing anxiety tightening in my chest. Maybe he was just another stranded commuter, waiting for a train that wouldn't come. But when I chanced to glance back, he was gone. The platform was empty again, but the sensation of being watched lingered. I remembered the way his presence had settled in my gut, heavy and suffocating. Minutes passed, but no sounds broke the silence except for the rhythmic ticking of the clock. I stood up, shoving my hands deep into my pockets, and took a few hesitant steps toward the exit. I needed to leave this place, to get away from whatever was happening. Yet each step seemed to draw me back into his magnetic pull. I hesitated, half turned toward the exit, when I spotted him again, this time on platform 3. He appeared as if he had materialized from thin air, standing in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the bright lights. My breath quickened. Why did he keep appearing? I swallowed hard, the panic rising within me, and took a step back, pressing myself against the wall. "Hey!" I tried to sound assertive, but my voice trembled in the emptiness. "What do you want?" No answer. He tilted his head slightly, like a predator assessing prey, and for a moment, my instinct screamed at me to run. But where? The station felt like a labyrinth, every exit leading me deeper into dread. I turned and walked briskly toward the ticket booth, hoping the flickering monitor would somehow provide me with a sliver of hope. The booth was empty, a grim reminder of the long hours of waiting. Desperate, I pressed my palms against the glass, peering into the darkened space beyond, searching for any clue of life. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed through the station, sharp and deliberate. I turned slowly, heart racing as I scanned the platforms. He was pacing back and forth, now at platform 1, his head lowered as if deep in thought, then suddenly lifted to meet my gaze. The chill that ran down my spine was electric, freezing me in place. My instinct screamed for me to flee, but my feet felt glued to the ground, heavy with dread. "Why are you following me?" I shouted, my voice cracking under the weight of fear, but he only continued to watch, the corners of his mouth curving into what could only be described as a smile. I stumbled backward, feeling the metal of the ticket booth cool against my skin, desperately searching for an escape. The air around me thickened, each breath more labored than the last. I turned and fled through the open door leading to the stairwell, the cold concrete beneath my feet an unwelcome reminder of my isolation. I raced down the steps, my heart pounding in rhythm with my frantic footsteps, hoping to find another exit, some means of escaping this nightmare. But the lower level was just as desolate. The lights flickered here too, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. I pressed on, almost blindly, the fear of what lingered above propelling me forward. I could hear nothing but the sound of my own breath, ragged and panicked. Then, to my horror, I saw him again, standing at the bottom of the stairwell, illuminated by the dull glow of a single overhead light. My blood ran cold as I realized there was no way out but through him. I wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but the words lodged in my throat as I felt the weight of his gaze press down on me like a shroud. "Leave me alone." I managed to force out, desperation clawing at my voice. He took a step closer, his movements slow and deliberate. I stumbled back, the wall pressing against my spine, my pulse racing uncontrollably. "Stop," I breathed, but it was too late. He was upon me, his presence enveloping me in darkness. As I stood there, paralyzed with fear, I realized the truth. In this deserted station, the sense of being trapped wasn't merely physical. It was a descent into a waking nightmare, one that I couldn't escape. The station had grown quiet, the rhythmic hum of footsteps replaced by an eerie stillness that set my nerves on edge. I had missed my last train home, and now I was trapped in this desolate place as twilight deepened into night. The fluorescent lights flickered above me, casting jagged shadows across the cracked tiles of the waiting area. I pulled my coat tighter around my body, wishing I had brought a friend or even a book to distract me from the growing sense of dread. The last train had left an hour ago, and the next one was not due for another hour and a half. I sighed, thinking about how I had wasted time earlier, sipping lukewarm coffee in the station cafe, oblivious to the clock. I had convinced myself there would always be another train, and I had been wrong. I glanced at the electronic schedule board. It crackled ominously, and the display flickered, casting an unsettling light on the platform. And then I saw him. The man stood at the far end of platform 3, his long coat swaying gently as he faced away from me. I felt an inexplicable chill run down my spine, though the air was unnaturally warm. He turned slightly, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of his profile, sharp features silhouetted against the dim light. My heart raced, but I told myself it was merely paranoia. After all, I was alone in a deserted place. Perhaps he was waiting for someone, just like I was. But when I blinked, he was gone. I rubbed my eyes, trying to dispel the creeping fear that tightened my chest. I pushed myself to walk toward the platform, hoping to shake off the uneasy feeling that had taken root in my gut. As I stepped onto the platform, the lights flickered again, dancing with shadows that seemed to deepen in the corners of my vision. I stood there, unsure of what to do, when I noticed a faint echo of footfalls behind me. I turned, but there was nothing. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and fragile in the stillness. A mocking silence answered, and I felt like a fool. There was no one here with me, or at least no one I could see. I took a deep breath and turned back toward the tracks, forcing myself to look down the platform's length. That's when I saw him again, this time on platform 1. He stood there, arms crossed as he leaned casually against a pillar, staring at me. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. It was as if he had warped through space, appearing wherever he pleased. I should have run, but curiosity held me there, anchoring me in place. I took a hesitant step towards him, half expecting him to vanish again. "Do you need help?" I called out, my voice barely rising above a whisper. He didn't answer, but something in his posture shifted, a predatory grace that sent a fresh wave of panic coursing through me. Why was I still standing there? The chill returned, settling in my bones as I turned on my heel and walked back to the waiting area. The bright lights flickered once more, and the shadows seemed to ripple like water. I glanced over my shoulder, but the man was gone again, though I could feel his presence lingering. I quickened my pace, almost stumbling over my own feet, desperate to put distance between us. As I reached the end of the waiting area, I spotted the cafe. It was dark inside, the tables and chairs turned upside down as if in haste. I pressed my hands against the glass, peering inside, hoping for a flicker of life, some sign of safety. But I was met with only silence. The cold glass sent a shiver through me, and I stepped back, mind racing for an escape plan. "Stop," a voice snarled from the shadows, and I froze. It was him again, closer this time, emerging from the dark recesses of the platform. I gasped, backing away instinctively, my heart pounding in my ears. "You're not supposed to be here." I turned, sprinting towards the exit, but the station doors slid shut with a metallic thud, locking me inside. The panic seized me as I banged against the glass, looking frantically for another way out. I felt dizzy, my mind racing with thoughts of how I could escape. The man's figure loomed closer, the shadows clinging to him like a second skin. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, but my voice cracked, betraying my fear. "Just let me go." He stepped closer, the cold light of the station catching his eyes, which glinted like steel. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low and melodic, laced with something dark. "You never took the time to notice me before. Now it's too late." I backed away, heart racing with each step, but the walls felt like they were closing in. There was nowhere to retreat. Desperation clawed at my throat as the realization struck me. He had been watching me. All those times I had felt eyes on me, those moments of dread that had slipped into my life at random, they had been him. Why me? I stammered, my breath coming in short gasps. What do you want from me? He smiled then, a slow, predatory smile that made my skin crawl. I want you to stay, he whispered, the words curling around me like hands grasping for my throat. In that moment, I understood. The station, the flickering lights, the echoes of loneliness, it was all a trap, and I had walked right into it. I turned to face him, adrenaline surging through me, but I felt the weight of despair pressing down. It would not end here. I had to find a way out, to escape before the darkness claimed me. I would not allow myself to be trapped with him. Not now, not ever. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sickly glow over the deserted platform. I huddled against a cold metal bench, my heart hammering in my chest as the realization of my solitude sank in. The last train had pulled away, leaving me alone in a place that felt more like a tomb than a train station. I glanced at the clock on the wall, its hands taunting me with every tick. Midnight had come and gone, and I had missed my last chance to escape. I wrapped my arms tighter around myself, trying to stave off the chill that seeped through my coat. Outside, the wind howled, a mournful echo that seemed to resonate with my own dread. I had considered calling for a taxi, but my phone lay silent in my bag, devoid of charge. I was stranded, and I could feel the weight of that word pressing heavily on my chest. As I sat there, the silence enveloped me like a thick fog. It was unsettling, the kind of quiet that made my skin crawl. I forced myself to focus on my surroundings. The station had an eerie beauty in the muted light, its once bustling platforms now ghostly quiet, the metal railings gleaming like teeth in the darkness. It was then that I first saw him, a figure standing at the far end of the platform. My breath caught in my throat. He was dressed in a long overcoat, his face hidden in the shadows. He appeared to be watching me. I squinted, trying to discern his features, but the distance was too great, and the dim light played tricks on my eyes. I rubbed my arms and turned away, shaking off the chill that settled deeper within me. I focused on the opposite platform, desperate to convince myself I was being paranoid. Perhaps he was waiting for someone, I told myself. I tried to read the posters on the wall, anything to distract me from that menacing presence. But whenever I stole a glance in his direction, he was still there, unmoving. Minutes passed like hours. I walked to the edge of the platform, straining to see if the man had moved. The wind carried a faint whisper, but I couldn't make out the words. I turned my back to the platform, forcing myself to breathe deeply. Calm down, I thought. I was just being silly. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him again, this time at the opposite end of my platform. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. How had he crossed so quickly? A rush of adrenaline shot through me. I felt a primal instinct to flee, and before I knew it, my legs were carrying me toward the station's entrance. I glanced back, but he was gone. I paused, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I stared into the darkness. Maybe he was just another late-night traveler. Surely he wasn't here for me, I reasoned. The thought of him shadowing me terrified me, especially with how quickly he had moved. I stepped away from the exit, retreating to the bench, where I tried to gather my shaky thoughts. A noise echoed through the station, a distant clang, like metal striking metal. I froze, my limbs turning to ice. The shadows seemed to shift around me, deepening in darkness. I leaned forward, straining to listen, but all that met my ears was the relentless howl of the wind. Then, as if summoned by my fear, I caught sight of the man again, emerging from a doorway leading to the ticket office. He stood just inside the entrance, illuminated only by the pale light spilling from the window. Our eyes locked for the briefest moment, and I felt a jolt in my chest. His expression was inscrutable, a mask of calm that belied the terror thrumming through me. He raised a hand, not in greeting, but as if beckoning me closer. I recoiled, shackled by an unseen force. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my body betrayed me, rooted to the spot. The air thickened, charged with a tension that felt almost palpable. Every fiber of my being urged me to bolt, yet I remained, ensnared in a web of fear. "Please," I whispered to the empty platform, "someone help me." As if in response, the lights flickered again, and suddenly, he was gone. I blinked, scanning the shadows for any sign of him. Panic clawed at my throat. I whipped around, searching for an escape. The station felt like a labyrinth, every corridor and platform merging into a haze of confusion. I stumbled down the main hallway, peering into the dark recesses of the station. I wanted to call for help, but the words wouldn't come. I found myself at the end of a narrow corridor, where a flickering exit sign beckoned me like a lifeline. I took a step toward it, and that's when I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. Was it him? My heart pounded in my ears as I turned, preparing to confront my pursuer. But the hallway was empty, just a stretch of peeling paint and shadows. I took a deep breath, fighting against the rising tide of hysteria. The wind screeched outside, sounding more like a cry for help than a natural element. In that moment, I knew I had to leave. I sprinted toward the exit, adrenaline fueling my every step. Just as my fingers brushed the door handle, I felt a presence behind me. I turned, and there he was, standing at the edge of the corridor, the very embodiment of dread. He didn't move, just stared, his eyes glinting with an unsettling calm. A scream built in my throat, but I forced myself to focus on escaping. I yanked the door open, stumbling into the cold night air, only to find the world outside just as desolate as inside. The station had swallowed me whole, and I was still trapped. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed like a death knell. I was left standing in the dark, utterly alone and with no place to run. Story 5, Behind the Walls. I had always dreamed of owning my own home, a sanctuary where the chaos of the outside world could be kept at bay. When I finally signed the last set of papers and received the keys to my modest two-bedroom house, I felt like I'd rung the victory bell. It sat in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by tall trees that whispered in the wind. The street was paved in shades of gray and lined with blooming hydrangeas, their blue and pink petals contrasting against the green of the grass. I moved in late September, and as the leaves turned to golden auburn, I felt a sense of peace as I unpacked my boxes. However, that peace began to fray soon after I met my neighbor, Mr. Collins. He was a tall man with thinning hair and an affable smile. The first time we crossed paths was on my front lawn. I was struggling with a stubborn cardboard box when he emerged from his home, a bright red baseball cap perched on his head. "Need a hand?" he called, waving sincerely. I accepted, and as we carried the box to my porch, we exchanged pleasantries. Mr. Collins spoke of the neighborhood, how it was safe, how the neighbors were friendly. He laughed lightly as he told me about his dog, Rufus, a golden retriever who loved to bark at squirrels but was, in fact, very sweet. At first, I appreciated his enthusiasm. He seemed eager to make me feel welcome. However, as days melted into weeks, that enthusiasm morphed into something more unsettling. Mr. Collins began stopping by unannounced, knocking on my door at odd hours. Sometimes, he would bring baked goods, claiming he had made too many cookies or muffins. I accepted his offerings politely but felt a nagging discomfort each time I closed the door behind him. He spoke in great detail about the neighborhood, reciting names I had only just heard once. "The Johnsons are having a barbecue tomorrow. You should join us," he suggested, as if he knew the Johnsons personally, as if I had already been invited. I politely declined, unsure of how to navigate the social web he was weaving. One afternoon, while I arranged my living room, I caught sight of Mr. Collins through the window. He stood on his porch, staring in my direction. I hesitated, unsure if I should wave or pretend not to see him. Just as I decided to avert my gaze, he waved enthusiastically, as if we were old friends. My heart fluttered with unease. Why was he watching me? Later that week, I decided to take Rufus's advice and venture to the local grocery store. I placed my items in the cart, listening to the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. As I rounded the corner toward the dairy aisle, I collided with Mr. Collins. He grinned, leaning casually against the shelf filled with yogurt. "Hey there. I wasn't expecting to see you here," he said, his eyes sparkling with an energy I found unnerving. "Just stocking up on some essentials," I replied, forcing a smile. "I know," he said, as if he had been observing my shopping habits for months. "I saw you picking out coffee the other day." A chill crept down my spine. I had only mentioned my love for strong coffee to a couple of friends on a video call. "Oh, yeah. It's my favorite," I stammered, feeling exposed. With an unsettling ease, he continued, "You should try the new brand they just had on sale last week." I bought a few bags myself. His knowledge about my habits felt intrusive, unsettling. The encounter left me shaken. That night, I locked my doors tightly, peering through the curtains to find Mr. Collins jogging past my house, his silhouette framed by the streetlights. I felt as though he had ensnared me in a web I couldn't escape. The following days dragged on, each one punctuated by Mr. Collins's unexpected appearances. He would ask about my work, the projects on my to-do list, details I hadn't even shared. It was as if he had been following me, piecing together fragments of my life like a puzzle. Whenever I returned home, I noticed that my porch light flickered more than usual, casting strange shadows that danced across the ground. One evening, as I sat alone in my dimly lit living room, I overheard a soft knock at the door. My stomach dropped. It was 9 p.m., late for a visit. A glance through the peephole revealed Mr. Collins, his expression eerily cheerful. I hesitated, heart racing, but eventually, I played the polite neighbor. When I opened the door, he stood there with a small potted plant. "Thought you could use some greenery. It'll brighten up your place," he said, stepping over the threshold before I could even invite him in. I barely listened to his chatter about plant care as I felt the walls of my own home shrinking around me. I wanted to scream that I didn't need him here, that I had been trying to establish my independence, but I could only muster a weak, "Thanks." Days turned into a blur of awkward conversations and unsettling realizations. I knew something was wrong, but admitting it felt like tearing apart the fabric of my new life. I had wanted to be part of this neighborhood, but now I simply wanted escape. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I pulled the covers tight around me, listening intently for any sound beyond the creaking of my old home. My eyes darted around the room, and when I glanced toward the window, I swear I saw a shadow lurking just beyond the glass. I blinked, and it was gone. I swallowed hard, wrestling with my mounting dread. Perhaps I should have been grateful for a neighbor who cared, but then again, was it caring, or something much darker? I closed my eyes, praying for sleep, but all I found was the creeping sensation that I was no longer safe in my own sanctuary. The morning sun barely breached the horizon when I woke with a start, still reeling from the events of the previous day. The faint, rhythmic tapping outside my window had echoed in my mind through the night, a relentless reminder of my neighbor's intrusion. I had tried to shake it off, convincing myself that I was simply overreacting to a stranger's curiosity. But a gnawing sense of unease lingered, clinging to the edges of my thoughts like mist. I padded into the kitchen, needing coffee to dispel the remnants of unrest. As I waited for the coffee to brew, I cast a cautious glance out the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the world outside. The street was empty, just the way I liked it. The stillness made the neighborhood feel almost serene, yet my heart raced with the memory of Mr. Walcott's unsettling smile. He had appeared at my door, seemingly out of nowhere, and somehow managed to weave himself into my life with little more than a disconcerting charm. The day unfolded like a cruel joke, each hour stretching into the next as I attempted to distract myself with chores and unpacking the boxes still strewn about the living room. But Mr. Walcott's voice lingered in my ears, replaying our conversation, his questions unnervingly personal. He had asked about my job, my family, and my hobbies, all with an intensity that left me feeling exposed. How did he know so much about me? It was as if he had already mapped out every detail of my existence long before I moved in. By midday, I needed fresh air. I stepped into the soft embrace of the autumn breeze, wrapping my sweater tighter around me as I wandered down the street. I felt like a character in a thriller, my every step echoing in my ears. I passed Mr. Walcott's house, an old, dilapidated structure with peeling paint and sagging eaves, shivers running down my spine. The windows seemed to watch me, dark and hollow like empty eyes. I quickened my pace, yearning for the anonymity of the park at the end of the street. But as I rounded the corner, I saw him. Mr. Walcott stood at the edge of his yard, beneath a large oak tree, his body rigid and eyes fixed on me. The sunlight glinted off his glasses, giving him a ghostly appearance. I stopped in my tracks, my heart thundering in my chest. Just moments ago, I thought I could escape him, if only for a little while. But there he was, rooted to the ground, as if he had been waiting for me. "Good afternoon, Emily," he called, a smile breaking across his weathered face. "I was hoping I'd run into you. I have some fresh apples from my garden I'd love to share." It was a kind gesture, and yet the way he said my name sent a ripple of discomfort through me. I managed to muster a polite smile, despite the knot twisting in my stomach. "No, thank you. I'm fine." I turned to leave, a sense of urgency propelling me forward. "Are you sure?" he pressed, taking a few steps toward me. "I know how busy moving can be. It can be quite exhausting without a bit of sweetness to lift your spirits." I forced out a laugh, but it fell flat. How could he know about my moving fatigue? I didn't remember mentioning it to anyone. The walls of his house loomed behind him like a predator watching its prey, and I felt the pull of his gaze. I turned on my heel and hurried away, barely glancing back. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I tried to immerse myself in unpacking boxes, yet my mind drifted to thoughts of Mr. Walcott and his unsettling behavior. Later that evening, as night crept in like a thief, I settled into my living room, the dim light of a solitary lamp casting long shadows on the walls. I flicked on the television, hoping to drown out my thoughts with background noise, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Suddenly, a sound broke through the static, the soft crunch of gravel. My heart plunged as I turned toward the window, peering into the darkness beyond. I saw him then, his silhouette standing on the edge of my driveway, a dark figure against the dim glow of my porch light. Panic coursed through me. How long had he been there? I hadn't heard him approach. I ducked behind the sofa, heart hammering in my chest as I fought to steady my breath. I strained to see, the tremors of fear rendering me still. What did he want? The light from my window cast an illuminating glow around him, revealing the same disturbingly serene smile that made my skin crawl. How could he look so ordinary, yet feel so menacing? He lingered for what felt like an eternity, and just as I thought he might turn away, he raised his hand and waved. A casual wave, as if he were greeting a friend. My heart raced, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I quickly grabbed my phone and texted my sister, asking her to call me. I needed to hear a familiar voice, a tether to reality, even if just for a moment. As I waited, I caught sight of Mr. Walcott stepping back, disappearing into the shadows of his yard, still waving. I couldn't breathe. I thought about the apples, his probing questions, the way he had seemed to slip into my life as if it were his own. My phone buzzed just then, a welcome distraction. It was my sister. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I hesitated, trying to find the words. "I'm fine. Just, can you stay on the line for a bit?" "Of course." "What's going on?" I glanced out the window again, my pulse racing. "It's my neighbor. He's been acting really strange, and I think he's watching me." "Emily, you just moved in. You're probably just feeling paranoid. People are friendly, especially in small towns." I let her words wash over me, but the knot in my stomach refused to loosen. "No, this feels different. He knows things too much. I can't shake the feeling that he's..." "Maybe you should introduce yourself properly," she suggested. "Get to know him. That might ease your mind." I wanted to agree, but the image of his unsettling smile haunted me. "Yeah, maybe," I replied, but I wasn't convinced. When I hung up, the house felt even quieter. I leaned back against the sofa, my eyes still locked on the window. I had to trust my gut. But how far could the line between friendly and sinister blur before it shattered? I knew I needed to keep my guard up. Mr. Walcott was not just a neighbor. He was a specter lurking in the shadows, and I was beginning to suspect that I was not his only focus. The mornings became a blend of unease and routine. I often found myself peering out the kitchen window, watching for any sign of Roger, my seemingly amiable neighbor. The charm of the old house I'd bought had faded with the knowledge that I wasn't alone in my isolation. He lived across the street, but it felt as if he stood right beside me, his presence palpable in the rustle of leaves or the creaking of my floorboards. It was a Tuesday when it happened again. I had just brewed a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the dimly lit kitchen, when a light knock echoed through the house. My heart sank. I had been hoping for a day without his interruptions. Reluctantly, I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked to the door, steeling myself against whatever peculiarities awaited me. Opening the door, I found Roger standing there, his usual disarming smile plastered across his face. He held out a plate of cookies, still warm. "I thought you might enjoy some fresh-baked treats. I made too many yesterday." I forced a smile, accepting the offering. "Thank you, Roger. That's very kind of you." He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. I nearly protested but felt my voice falter. Instead, I gestured awkwardly for him to sit at my kitchen table, the cookies balanced on a napkin between us. As we chatted about mundane things, how the weather had been unseasonably warm, the state of the local basketball team, I avoided the prickling discomfort that bubbled beneath the surface. But no matter how trivial our conversation, he often veered into topics that unnerved me. "How's your new job going?" he asked, tilting his head slightly, his blue eyes glinting with an intensity that made me shiver. I hesitated. It hadn't been a week since I had started working at the local library, and yet he spoke as if he'd been there beside me, watching every nervous interaction I had with my coworkers. "It's good. Lots of new faces to learn," I replied, hoping my voice didn't quaver. He nodded, his gaze steady, and I felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. "I bet you're enjoying the quiet, away from the hustle of your old job." My stomach twisted. He knew more than I had shared with him. I forced myself to laugh. "You could say that." Roger's smile faltered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of something darker. "Sometimes, it's nice just to watch the world go by, isn't it? To take it all in." Before I could respond, he leaned in closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a dark secret. "You know, I've kept an eye on this neighborhood for a long time. It's a good place for someone like you. Lots of friendly faces. You can feel safe here." The air thickened with an unspoken weight. My instinct screamed at me, warning me of the danger beneath his smooth words. I forced myself to nod, to smile, but inside, panic began to swell. After what felt like an eternity, Roger eventually stood to leave, the cookies barely touched. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask," he said, his eyes lingering on mine just a moment too long. I closed the door behind him, locked it, and leaned against it, my heart racing. What did he mean by watching? I tried to brush the thoughts away, but the way he stood at my doorstep, casually invading my space, left a foul taste in my mouth. Days turned into weeks, and Roger's visits became more frequent. Each time, he brought something with him: jams, herbs from his garden, the occasional handmade trinket. I accepted them all with a forced gratitude, but every gift felt like an added weight on my shoulders, a reminder of his unyielding watchfulness. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to clear my mind. The sun was shining, and for a moment, I felt I could escape the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over my life. I strolled down tree-lined streets, observing families enjoying picnics, children playing tag. But as I rounded a corner, my heart sank. Roger stood on his porch, arms crossed, watching me with an unsettling intensity. Even from a distance, I could see the ghost of a smile on his lips. I turned away, pretending I hadn't noticed him. My pulse quickened with every step as I hurried back to the sanctuary of my home, the feeling of being watched crawling beneath my skin. That night, I lay in bed, the bedroom cloaked in shadows. I replayed all our interactions in my mind, searching for clues, for some sign that I was merely overreacting. But the truth persisted like a bitter aftertaste, clawing at the back of my mind. I turned on the bedside lamp, casting a warm glow but leaving the corners of the room steeped in darkness. Sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned, anxiety coiling tighter around my chest until finally, weariness claimed me. I drifted into a restless sleep, only to be awakened by a noise. A faint tapping echoed from the window. Heart pounding, I sat up, squinting into the darkness. My window faced the street, and through the glass, I could see Roger standing there, illuminated by the pale moonlight. He smiled, and my blood ran cold. I didn't know how long he had been there, but every instinct screamed at me to get away. I slid out of bed and crept quietly to my bedroom door, praying he wouldn't notice me. I could hear him mumbling something, the words lost to the silence of the night. I could only think of one thing: how had he gotten here? I hadn't invited him. I hadn't even seen him leave his house. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, but the light from the screen flickered like a warning. I needed to call someone, anyone. But as I turned back toward the window, he was gone, swallowed by the darkness. My stomach twisted as a clammy fear settled in the pit of my belly. I knew then that I was no longer just a neighbor to him. I was something to be watched, dissected, and perhaps even collected. That realization suffocated me, and I sank to the floor, the weight of my new life pressing down on me like a shroud. I had to find a way out before it was too late. I had finally settled into my new home, a quaint cottage nestled at the end of a tree-lined lane. The unpacking was nearly complete, and the chaos of boxes had begun to yield to a semblance of comfort. Yet, no matter how much I tried to bask in the tranquility of my fresh start, my neighbor's peculiar behavior lingered in the back of my mind like a vine choking a once thriving plant. It had started a week after my first encounter with Mr. Langley, the man who lived next door. At first, I thought he was merely being neighborly. He brought over a plate of cookies, a classic gesture of goodwill, and offered to help me with my garden. But beneath that veneer of kindness lay something unsettling. The day began like any other. The sun spilled through my kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the coffee I brewed, yet I could not shake the feeling of being watched. I dismissed the thought as anxiety, remnants of a life spent too long in a place that felt hostile. Deciding to shake it off, I stepped onto my porch to breathe in the fresh air, hoping to ground myself in the moment. As I leaned against the railing, I spotted Mr. Langley emerging from his house across the way. He stood on his porch, a warm smile spread across his face, a broom in hand. "Good morning, Claire," he called, his voice cheerful and nearly melodic. "Just tidying up a bit. How's the settling in?" "Good, thank you," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just getting to know the place." "Ah, yes. Lots of charm here. You'll love it once you've put your mark on it." He swept the broom across the porch, as if clearing away invisible debris and watching me at the same time. "I noticed you're a fan of succulents. The ones in your window are lovely." My heart sank. I hadn't mentioned my plans to anyone. It was a personal choice, one I reveled in, yet here he was, knowing details about my life without any invitation. "Ah, thanks," I stammered, my throat suddenly dry. I like to keep things green." He nodded, as if he understood some unspoken bond between us. The conversation was eerie, so I made a hasty excuse to retreat inside, my pulse racing. I leaned against the wall, attempting to steady my breathing. I had to put an end to whatever this was. I just needed to gather my thoughts. A few days later, as I sorted through boxes in the living room, I heard a light knock on my door. It was Mr. Langley again, an all too familiar smile plastered on his face. "Thought I'd drop by and see if you need anything," he said cheerfully, stepping over the threshold without an invite. I was taken aback but offered a weak smile. "I'm okay, really. Just unpacking." "Unpacking can be overwhelming," he continued, glancing around my half-empty space. "I remember when I first moved in here, so many boxes, so many decisions. I'm here if you need help. I've got some tools that could assist with the garden." "Thanks, but I think I have it under control," I replied, trying to maintain a polite distance. His gaze lingered on a photo I had propped against a box, a picture of my late grandmother and me. "Your grandmother was a lovely woman. She had quite the knack for nurturing plants, just like you." I froze. How did he know about my grandmother? I had only mentioned her in passing to my parents a few weeks prior, and even then, in a way that didn't seem to stick in anyone's mind. "Yeah, she loved gardening," I managed, my voice firmer now, as I crossed my arms defensively. "But I really don't need help." Mr. Langley's smile faltered for the briefest moment, replaced by a flicker of something unreadable. Of course," he said, stepping back reluctantly. "Just thought I'd check in. You know where to find me." After he left, I locked the door and paced through my kitchen, a knot forming in my stomach. I sat down heavily at the table, my hands shaking. What did he want? Why did I feel like I was in the crosshairs of his scrutiny? My mind raced as I pieced together the last few encounters, each seemingly innocent yet laced with a creeping dread. That night, sleep eluded me. The shadows danced on the walls, whispering secrets I feared to hear. I had to confront Mr. Langley about his behavior, but how could I without sounding paranoid? I clutched my phone, the screen illuminated, yet the thought of reaching out to a friend for support felt pointless. They wouldn't understand the weight of a neighbor's gaze that bore down like a stone. The following evening, I resolved to be more cautious. I opted to keep the curtains drawn, a barrier against Mr. Langley's curious eyes. Yet, that very decision felt like a defeat, as if I was succumbing to fear. I was in the middle of making dinner when my doorbell rang again. My heart hammering in my chest, I briefly considered ignoring it. But curiosity and caution wrestled within me, and I eventually approached the door. Peeking through the peephole, I saw Mr. Langley standing there, hands clasped behind his back, the same patient smile on his lips. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door, forcing a smile. "Hello, Mr. Langley." "Evening, Claire." "I thought I'd bring over a little something I made," he said, presenting me with a small basket filled with what appeared to be homemade pastries. "Figured you might appreciate some dessert after a long day of unpacking." "Thank you, but," I hesitated, my instinct screaming for me to decline. "I really can't accept this." "Oh, it's nothing, really," he replied, tilting his head, that unnerving smile still intact. "I just wanted you to feel at home." I took the basket hesitantly, fingers brushing against his as I did. The contact sent chills through me. "I appreciate it, Mr. Langley, but please, I'd really like some space." His expression shifted slightly, a shadow crossing his features. "Of course, Claire. Just looking out for you. Neighbors should look out for each other, don't you think?" As he turned to leave, I felt a surge of dread wash over me. He knew more than he should, had taken an interest beyond mere neighborly concern. Watching, waiting, it felt like I was caught in a web, and he was the spider drawing me closer. After I closed the door, I leaned against it, my heart racing. I would have to find a way to protect myself, to reclaim my space. But as the night deepened around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. It was early evening when I returned home from work, the sky bruised with purples and oranges, blending into the deepening blues of twilight. I had almost forgotten the strange encounters with my neighbor, Mr. Winters, in the chaos of my day. As I fumbled with my keys, I tried to shake the unease from my mind, but it clung to me like a shadow. I stepped inside my house, the familiar scent of old wood and paint welcoming me. I turned the lock behind me, and for a moment, I felt safe. I dropped my bag on the kitchen table and headed for the fridge, craving something cold to sip on. The silence of the house wrapped around me, soothing yet oddly stifling. Just as I poured a glass of water, a soft knock echoed through the silence. My heart raced. Mr. Winters? I hadn't seen him since our last awkward interaction when he dropped by unannounced the previous week, talking about the weather like he was discussing the latest Broadway show. I took a deep breath and opened the door. There he stood, a small plate of cookies in hand, a benign smile stretched across his face. "Hello, Lisa. I thought I'd bring you a little something to welcome you to the neighborhood." "Thanks, Mr. Winters," I replied, desperately trying to sound neutral. "That's very kind of you." He stepped past me without waiting for an invitation. I blinked, taken aback. "Oh, please come in," I stammered, stepping aside. He walked straight into my living room, placing the plate on my coffee table as if he'd done it 100 times before. "Nice place you've got here," he said, his eyes roving over the walls adorned with my sparse decorations, the unfinished boxes strewn about. "Thanks," I replied, attempting to sound casual. "I've been working on it." He nodded, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "I've seen you working on it. I stopped by the other day when you were unpacking. You have a lovely collection of books." A chill ran down my spine. How long had he been watching me? "Oh, really?" I forced a laugh. I didn't realize anyone would be watching. Mr. Winters chuckled softly, but there was an edge in his eyes that made my skin crawl. "I just meant it was nice to see someone so dedicated. It's good to have neighbors who care." I shifted uncomfortably, trying to avoid his gaze. "I appreciate the compliment." He stepped closer, the smell of his cologne mixing with an unnatural scent reminiscent of damp earth. "You know, Lisa, I've been here a long time. I've seen a lot of neighbors come and go. You're a breath of fresh air." I fidgeted, glancing at the cookies, a bright green and red swirl of icing decorating them in a way that seemed overly festive for the season. They looked delicious, by the way. I'll have to share them with my friends. A flash of disappointment crossed his face, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Oh, you don't need to do that. They're for you. Just a small gesture to say welcome. Right, I said slowly, taking a step back. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate it. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're welcome, Lisa. Just remember, I'm always around if you need anything. I'm in the blue house across the street. I'll keep that in mind, I replied, forcing a smile. I'll let you get back to whatever you were doing. He lingered for a moment longer, his gaze scanning my living room as if he were cataloging everything within it. You know, I can help with renovations if you need. I have some experience. Thanks, but I think I can handle it, I said, trying to keep my tone light as I ushered him toward the door. He raised his eyebrows, an eerie grin splitting his face, then stepped outside. Just remember, Lisa, I'm always here. And with that, he waved and strolled back to his house, leaving me standing in the doorway, my heart racing. I closed the door and leaned against it, closing my eyes for a moment. The cookies sat on the table like a taunt, their vibrant colors almost mocking me. I had to get to the bottom of this. Later that night, I sat on my couch, the soft glow of a lamp casting shadows across the walls. I'd set the cookies aside, unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't right about them. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my social media feed, looking for a distraction. As I flicked through posts, a notification pinged. A friend of mine had shared a video about neighborhood safety and surveillance, focusing on how to recognize suspicious behavior. My stomach twisted as I watched. The narrator spoke of the signs, too much familiarity, watching without being invited, the odd way a neighbor could know your habits without you ever discussing them. Was I being paranoid? Maybe Mr. Winters was simply a quirky old man. Still, the idea that he could be watching me, cataloging my life while I was blissfully unaware, sent a shudder through me. I stood, pacing the room, peeking out the window to see if he was out there, lurking like a ghost in the fading light. The street was empty, shadows stretching across the pavement in the dying dusk. I felt ridiculous, standing there staring into the dark. Maybe I just needed to relax, to let go of the tension that had seeped into my bones. But as I settled into bed, the unease returned, creeping through my thoughts. I pulled the covers up to my chin and stared at the ceiling, images of Mr. Winters invading my mind. A friendly face, a kind demeanor, yet those eyes, those unsettling, observant eyes. Sleep eluded me, tangled with anxious thoughts. I finally drifted off, only to be jolted awake in the dead of night by a low sound, a soft knock, rhythmic and persistent. My heart thundered in my chest as I held my breath, straining to listen. It came again, a gentle yet intentional tap against my door. Mr. Winters, I whispered to myself, a horrible realization settling over me like fog. He had come to check on me, to see if I was alone, to see what I was doing. I pressed my back against the headboard, fighting the urge to scream, my mind racing with the possibilities of what he might want. The knock came again, more insistent now, and I felt a chilling dread wrap around my throat. I was not safe in my own home. I was merely a player in a game I didn't even know I was a part of. Story 6, Chasing Shadows. The low hum of my car's engine filled the silence as I navigated the desolate highway, the asphalt stretching endlessly beneath the dim glow of my headlights. It was just past midnight, and I had been driving for hours, leaving behind the chaos of my week, a job that never ceased to demand more, a life that felt trapped in routine. The soft rock ballads on the radio faded into background noise, drowning beneath the weight of my thoughts. As I glanced at the rearview mirror, I saw the headlights of another vehicle trailing a few hundred feet behind me. At first, I brushed it off, attributing it to the sparse traffic that came and went on this lonely stretch. But a sense of unease crept in when I noticed the car hadn't wavered in distance, maintaining a constant presence like a persistent shadow. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, forcing myself to focus on the road ahead. The monotonous scenery blurred into a dark void, save for the occasional flicker of roadside reflectors. I turned the radio up, trying to shake off the discomfort that began to coil in my stomach. The headlights remained unwavering, comfortably close yet too distant to make out any details. I had passed several small towns, their lights twinkling like distant stars before being swallowed by the night, and the thought of my own solitude felt heavier as the miles rolled by. The highway stretched endlessly, a ribbon of black under a blanket of stars, and my anxiety began to morph into a tight knot of dread. I stole another glance in the mirror. The car behind me appeared to be an older model, perhaps a sedan, but the darkness obscured its color and features. A flash of silver caught my eye. Was it just the moonlight, or had I imagined it? The car was still there, and it felt like it was breathing down my neck, each mile growing heavier with tension. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted a rest stop ahead, its flickering lights a beacon of safety in the oppressive night. I decided to pull over, craving a break from the road and a chance to calm my frazzled nerves. As I parked, the vehicle behind me slowed, its headlights cutting through the gloom as it pulled into the lot beside mine. My heart raced as I watched the car come to a stop. I could feel the weight of its presence, an invisible force pressing down on my chest as I took a shaky breath. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, my wide eyes contrasting sharply with the comfortable darkness of the car's interior. I hesitated, debating whether to stay locked inside or venture out into the night. But the suffocating silence, broken only by the distant chirps of crickets, coaxed me into action. I unbuckled my seatbelt, reluctantly reached for the door handle, and stepped into the cool night air. The rest stop was eerily quiet, the vending machines hummed softly, and the glow of the overhead lights seemed unnaturally bright against the thick shadows. I glanced around, the tension in my shoulders easing slightly as I focused on the mundane bathroom signs, a desolate picnic table, and the distant sound of a car door slamming. But then my gaze shifted back to the car parked next to mine, and a chill ran down my spine. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping out of the sedan with a deliberate slowness that made my heart pound. They wore dark clothing and a hood that obscured most of their face, but as they drew closer, I caught sight of a wide smile that felt almost too wide, stretching unnaturally across their face. A jolt of fear tightened in my chest. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes, those empty voids that glinted with the reflection of the lights. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, but my body betrayed me, frozen in place as the figure approached. They walked casually, almost leisurely, their movements fluid yet somehow predatory. I could hear the crunch of gravel beneath their feet, each step amplifying the dread that coiled tighter in my stomach. My mind raced through 1,000 scenarios, none of which ended well, each one darker than the last. "Hey there," the figure called out, their voice smooth and unsettling. "You're out late." I forced myself to respond, my words tumbling out in a stutter. Just taking a break." Their smile widened, morphing into something that chilled me to my core. "Mind if I join you for a moment?" I shook my head instinctively, retreating a half step toward my car. "I really should be going." "Oh, come on," they persisted, their tone syrupy sweet. "It's not often you get to meet strangers on the road. Let's chat." With every word, the air between us thickened, the atmosphere charged with a sensation that felt both captivating and repulsive. The smile never faltered, but the glint in their eyes darkened, betraying something sinister beneath the surface. I fought the urge to bolt back to my car, to escape the mounting tension that threatened to swallow me whole. I really need to go, I repeated, more firmly this time, but they merely took a step closer, invading my personal space with a confidence that sent a shiver racing up my spine. Just one question, they said, tilting their heads slightly, as if genuinely curious. What are you afraid of? In that moment, I realized it wasn't just the stranger before me I feared. It was the darkness that loomed behind them, the desolate miles of highway that stretched back into the unknown, and the suffocating sense of isolation that came with the open road. As I backed away instinctively, my heart thundered in my chest, the edge of panic clawing its way up my throat. With no other choice, I turned and sprinted back to my car, scrambling to reach the safety of my vehicle. But the sound of footsteps behind me urged me to go faster, each echo a reminder of the dark promise lingering in the night. The weight of the night pressed down on me, thick and suffocating, as I maneuvered my sedan along the winding highway. My headlights sliced through the darkness, illuminating the occasional flicker of roadside signs that stood as sentinels to the empty stretch ahead. I had expected the drive to be uneventful, but the stillness became a creeping presence that gnawed at the edges of my mind. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, a chill trickled down my spine. A pair of headlights hovered behind me, a constant, unyielding glow that had been trailing for miles. I tried to convince myself it was just another late-night traveler, but the way the car matched my speed felt wrong, like it was tethered to me by some unseen force. I quickened my pace, but the shadow behind me remained a steady companion, an echo of my own movements. Panic fluttered in my chest, but I pushed it down. Focus on the road, I told myself. Just keep driving. I turned up the radio, hoping to drown out the oppressive silence that seemed to wrap around me. The static-filled songs only heightened my agitation. The seconds ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last, until I finally spotted an exit sign for a rest stop ahead. I felt a mixture of relief and dread. The thought of stopping felt like admitting defeat, yet the need to break away from the suffocating presence behind me was overwhelming. I pulled into the rest stop parking lot, feeling the car behind me hesitate before turning in as well. I parked under a flickering streetlight, my heart pounding. Peering through the windshield, I watched as the car slowed to a stop next to mine. My breath hitched when I saw the driver, a man. He sat for a moment, unmoving, as if he were sizing me up. Then he opened the door, and an unsettling smile spread across his face. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I should have driven off, but my body felt paralyzed. He took a few steps towards my car, the night swallowing any sound he made. The smile never left his face. I couldn't make out his features in the dim light, but something about him felt hollow, as if he were a puppet with strings pulled too tight. As he approached, I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking. I should call the police, or at least lock the doors. My mind raced in a desperate search for a rational explanation, but logic faltered under the weight of my fear. He reached my passenger side, leaning down slightly to peer into the window, the smile stretching wider as if he found some hidden joy in my terror. "What are you doing out here all alone?" he asked, his voice smooth but laced with a disquieting amusement. I swallowed hard, refusing to answer. My instinct screamed at me to drive away, to escape whatever sinister game he was playing. But the engine felt like a distant dream, the key in my pocket becoming a heavy anchor. The longer I hesitated, the more I felt his gaze bore into me, the weight of his presence suffocating. "Hey, don't be shy," he continued, leaning even closer. "I just wanted to talk. It's not safe out here at night, you know?" I forced myself to meet his eyes, searching for any sign of humanity behind that maddening smile. Instead, I saw the glint of something darker, a predatory hunger that made my stomach twist in knots. I had to get out of here, but I couldn't seem to find my voice. In a moment of clarity, I finally grabbed the key from my pocket, ready to turn it in the ignition when his hand suddenly shot out, slapping against the window. His fingers left dark smudges against the glass, and I recoiled, my breath hitching once more. "You can't just sit there," he insisted, the smile faltering but never completely vanishing. "Come on, just roll down the window. I promise I'm friendly." My heart hammered as if it were trying to break free from my chest. I couldn't look away from his face, the contrast of his eerie smile against the dim light striking me as surreal. "No," I said, my voice trembling. "I need to go." His expression darkened in an instant, the friendliness replaced by something raw and threatening. "You're making a mistake, sweetheart," he warned, standing upright again. His posture shifted, becoming predatory as he leaned closer to my door. "Trust me, it's better if you just cooperate." The warning sent me into a panic. I turned the key, but the engine sputtered hollowly. My stomach dropped when I realized it had stalled. My heart raced, and adrenaline kicked in. I had to act. I shoved my foot down on the gas pedal, but the car's reluctance only added to my dread. "Don't be foolish," he said with a sneer, the charming veneer evaporating to reveal a cruel intent. "You drive away now, and you'll regret it." Finally, the engine roared to life, and I slammed the gear into drive. I barely had time to look ahead before I pressed down hard on the accelerator. As I peeled away from the rest stop, I cast one last glance in the rearview mirror. He stood there, still smiling, a dark silhouette against the glow of the rest stop lights. The reassuring flicker of the streetlight dimmed behind me as the shadows swallowed him whole. I sped down the highway, heart racing, each turn of the wheels pushing me further from danger. But a new terror settled in my chest. This night wasn't over. Somehow, I knew he would follow. The headlights of the car behind me flickered in and out of focus as I drove further along the lonely highway. It was nearly midnight, and the sparse traffic had all but disappeared, leaving me encased in solitude under the heavy blanket of the dark sky. The rhythmic hum of the tires against the asphalt matched my heart's unsteady beat, echoing the anxiety that had settled in my chest ever since I noticed the car tailing me. At first, I thought nothing of it. Just a fellow traveler, perhaps. But as the miles stretched on, I couldn't shake the suffocating feeling of being pursued. The car, a dark, nondescript sedan, had maintained a steady distance, appearing and disappearing in the blur of my rearview mirror like a specter haunting my every move. Every time I glanced back, its headlights glowed ominously, a constant reminder that I was not alone on this empty stretch of road. I took a deep breath and tried to calm my nerves, adjusting the rearview mirror to get a better look. The driver behind me was just a shadow, obscured by the glare of the headlights. Still, the unease gnawed at me. I had read enough horror stories to know that a tailgater wasn't always benign. I clenched the steering wheel tighter, focusing on the road ahead. With no sign of gas stations or roadside diners, the sense of isolation deepened. I began to look for a place to pull over, hoping to shake this ominous feeling. When I finally spotted a rest stop up ahead, relief washed over me. I signaled, eager for a break. The looming figure of the rest area, illuminated by flickering lights, felt like a sanctuary in my growing unease. As I parked, I stole a glance back. The dark sedan had followed me, pulling into the opposite side of the lot. My heart raced as I watched the driver step out. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, the individual appeared male, tall, and cloaked in an unsettling smile that seemed too wide, too cheerful for the late hour. I couldn't see his eyes, hidden behind the shadows of his brow, but the way he moved sent a shiver down my spine. I forced myself to look away, grabbing my phone from the passenger seat, fidgeting with it as I considered my options. Should I call someone? The thought of being stranded in this desolate place gnawed at me. Outside, I could hear the soft crunch of gravel beneath his footsteps, each sound amplifying my trepidation. I watched through the windshield as he began to approach my car, his gait casual yet deliberate. It was unnervingly calm, an inappropriate contrast to my fraying nerves. The rest stop was empty, devoid of other travelers who might have provided safety in numbers. I felt utterly alone, a vulnerability that clung to me like a shroud. I contemplated starting the engine and driving off, but something rooted me to my seat. It was as if my body wanted to confront what was happening, as if I needed to understand the source of my fear. Perhaps he was just an overeager traveler, I thought. Yet, the instinct of survival screamed at me to flee. As he reached my window, he paused, leaning against the side of my car. The smile remained plastered on his face, broad and unsettling. "Hey there," he called, his voice smooth. "Fancy a little chat?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, I opted for silence, my heart thumping wildly against my rib cage. I gripped the steering wheel, feeling the tension in my hands. "Long night, huh?" he continued, as if initiating a friendly conversation. The way he tilted his head made the smile seem even more grotesque, stretching his lips unnaturally. "I'm just looking for someone to share the road with. It gets lonely out here." My mind raced, scanning for an escape route. Fear flooded my system. "I'm fine, thank you," I finally managed to say, my voice shaky and unconvincing. I ached to drive away, but the realization hit me like a punch. My keys were still in the ignition. I couldn't just start the car with him standing right there. He straightened up, his smile faltering for just a moment. "You shouldn't be out here all alone." "It's dangerous," he said, his tone shifting to something more sinister. The words were casual, but the way he said them sent chills racing up my spine. "You never know what might happen on the road." My mind raced. I had to act. I couldn't let him find me vulnerable. I took a deep breath, my fingers brushing against the gear shift, contemplating making a break for it. Suddenly, he leaned closer, his face inches from the glass, his expression morphing into something darker. "Why don't you let me in?" he suggested, the smile returning, but now it felt malevolent. He reached for the door handle, and instinct kicked in. The initial shock of his sudden closeness awakened a primal fear. In that moment, I could feel the weight of my decision pressing against me. I slammed the car into reverse, my foot slamming the accelerator without a second thought. The tires squealed against the gravel as I shot backward, narrowly missing him. I glanced back in time to see him stumble, a look of surprise flashing across his face, before I swung the wheel and tore out of the rest stop, my heart racing faster than the car itself. The road felt like a lifeline, and as the headlights of his car receded in my rearview mirror, a breath caught in my throat, a mix of relief and dread. I drove on, the landscape blurring past, but a chilling realization settled in: this wasn't over. The darkness of the highway stretched endlessly ahead, and somewhere behind me, he was still there, waiting, and perhaps he wouldn't be content to let me go this time. The quiet hum of my engine was the only sound that accompanied me as I drove along the desolate stretch of highway. The moon hung high in the starless sky, casting ghostly shadows through the trees that bordered the road. It was nearly midnight. The air inside my car felt thick with the sensation that I was utterly alone, a feeling both comforting and unnerving at once. I had been driving for hours, my eyes straining against the fatigue that threatened to creep in. As I rounded a bend, I caught a glimpse of headlights in my rearview mirror. They flickered for an instant before the car settled behind me, the glow intensifying as it seemed to latch onto my bumper like a shadow. I brushed it off at first, chalking it up to another weary traveler, perhaps a trucker or someone else sharing this lonely road. But as the miles dragged on, the headlights remained fixed, unwavering in their pursuit. With every passing mile, I felt a sinking dread pooling in my stomach. My foot hovered over the brake as I glanced at the clock. It was too late for this. I needed to stop, to breathe, to shake off the unease that clung to me like a wet blanket. Off in the distance, I spotted a rest stop illuminated by harsh white lights, and I decided that I would pull in, if only to break the spell of this unwanted tailgater. The tires crunched against gravel as I parked beneath the flickering overhead lights, momentarily blinding myself as I shifted gears to turn off the engine. I took a deep breath, the sound of the car engine fading into an echoing silence. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw the other vehicle pull in beside me, its headlights cutting off abruptly, leaving only the dull glow of the overhead lights. My heart raced as I scanned the inside of the car. A middle-aged man sat behind the wheel, his face obscured by shadow. I peeled my gaze away, convincing myself it was just a coincidence. But as I opened the car door and stepped out, my instinct screamed at me. The man had emerged too, his silhouette looming large against the stark lighting of the rest stop. I forced myself to walk slowly, to seem casual. It wasn't like I was in any real danger, right? Yet the smile that spread across his face as he approached felt anything but reassuring. His teeth glinted in the light, a sickly white that contrasted starkly against his sun-kissed skin. "Hey there," he called out, his voice slicing through the stillness. I forced a smile in return, though my gut twisted at the sight of him. "You lost?" he asked, leaning against the side of my car. "Just taking a break," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I could feel the weight of his gaze, assessing and predatory. Where had he come from? Had he followed me the entire way? "Late night drive, huh?" he continued, unfazed by my discomfort. "Ain't safe to be out on these roads alone. You know that, right?" I nodded, wishing I could retreat into the safety of my car. I cast a glance toward the lot, desperate for any sign of other travelers, but the rest stop was as empty as before. Just the two of us in this vast expanse of darkness. "What brings you out here?" he asked, edging closer, his smile now stretching unnaturally wide. I was sure he could see the panic creeping into my expression, and it fed his delight. I was visiting family," I stammered, suddenly feeling small under his scrutiny. The lie rolled off my tongue poorly, and I wondered if I could simply walk away. "Family's a good reason to be out. But I wonder if they'd be worried about you driving all alone," he said, tilting his head with a faint curiosity. My stomach churned at the suggestion that he somehow knew more about me than I had let on. "I should get going," I mumbled, readying myself to retreat to the safety of my vehicle. But before I could make my move, he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You shouldn't drive too long without a companion, you know. This stretch has been known to be dangerous." At that moment, the weight of his words sank deep into my bones. The stories seeped into my mind, ghosts of tales I had heard long ago about travelers who vanished on these deserted roads, victims of misfortune or something darker. I felt a chill run down my spine as I met his gaze, the unsettling smile still plastered on his face, a predator closing the distance. "I really should go," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Wait," he said, and I could hear the thinly veiled insistence laced in his tone. "You don't want to drive while you're anxious. Why don't you let me keep you company? Just until you're calm again." The words dripped with implication, the smile now uncomfortably wide, the glint in his eyes revealing a hunger beneath the surface. I felt trapped, ensnared in his gaze, my heart pounding a desperate rhythm in my chest. The moment dragged on, stretching itself into eternity as I weighed my options, and the sinking feeling of dread festered. I turned toward my car, hoping to put some distance between us, but he followed, undeterred. I could hear the gravel crunch beneath his feet, and my breath quickened as I scrambled for my keys, searching for an escape route. "Please," I said, forcing the word out with urgency. "I need to go." But the man merely chuckled, a low sound that resonated through the vast emptiness of the night. "You really think you can run away from me?" With a surge of panic, I turned and unlocked my door, the sound of the click echoing like a warning bell. He reached out, his hand brushing against my arm, and for a fleeting moment, I felt the cold grip of fear wrap around me like a vice. I jumped into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut behind me, locking it as I fumbled with the ignition. But time seemed to stretch infinitely as I glanced up to see him still standing there, a grotesque grin plastered across his face, eyes gleaming with something dark and hungry. As the engine roared to life, I tore out of the rest stop, tires screeching against asphalt, leaving behind the figure of a man whose smile twisted into something sinister as the lights of the rest stop faded into the distance. I drove faster than I ever had before, desperate to escape the demon that had tainted my night. But even as I sped away, I felt the insidious remnants of his gaze lingering like a shadow on my mind, one that would haunt me for nights to come. The night stretched endlessly, a vast canvas painted in deep blues and blacks, dotted with the occasional glow of distant stars. I had been driving for hours, each mile marker blurring into the next as fatigue gnawed at my senses. I was alone on the highway, just me and the darkened stretch of road that felt more like a tunnel than a path home. It was around 2 in the morning when I first noticed the headlights creeping up behind me. At first, it was a harmless presence, a flickering light in my rearview mirror that didn't seem threatening. But as the car drew closer, I felt an unease settle in my gut. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing myself to accelerate a little, but the car behind me kept pace, its beams cutting through the inky shadows, an unyielding predator. I checked my speed, safe, legal. I glanced at the fuel gauge. It was half full, but I knew I wouldn't make it to the next town without a break. The rest stop sign looming ahead was my only salvation, a promise of refuge, if only for a moment. I took a deep breath, steeling my resolve, and turned off the highway. The rest stop was a lonely outpost, flickering fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, casting a sickly glow over the emptiness. I pulled into a parking spot away from the few other vehicles, the shadows around me stretching as the night deepened. A lone figure stood beside one of the cars parked nearby, a silhouette against the harsh lights. I glanced at my rearview mirror, and there it was, the car that had been tailing me had pulled in as well. A wave of anxiety crashed over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than coincidence. I watched the driver emerge from the car, a tall figure draped in a dark jacket, the hood pulled low. I forced myself to take a steadying breath, reminding myself that I was just being paranoid. After all, it was just a rest stop. There were other travelers around, even if they were few and far between. But then the driver began to walk towards my car, and my heart raced. Their face was obscured, but I could see the unsettling smile that split their features. The kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes, just a mask of congeniality that felt more menacing than friendly. I wanted to turn the key in the ignition and speed away, but my body felt stuck, a heavy weight anchoring me to the seat. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. It was 2:50. This was all too strange. I needed to get out, to stretch my legs and shake off the feeling, but the driver was closing the distance, their footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. It was just a rest stop, I reminded myself again. Surely, they were just another weary traveler looking for company, or perhaps they needed directions. But as I watched, I felt the creeping sensation that something was terribly wrong. Before I could decide what to do, they reached my window, their breath visible in the cold air. I locked eyes with the figure, and it was then I truly saw the smile, but there was no warmth in it, only an unsettling intensity. My heart thudded violently in my chest. "Hey there," the driver said, their voice laced with an almost cheery tone that sent a shiver down my spine. "Nice night for a drive, isn't it?" I didn't respond. I couldn't. Where were the other travelers? I'd seen a couple of cars in the lot, but I felt isolated now, as if the rest of the world had vanished. My instinct screamed at me to drive away. "Are you okay?" They pressed, taking a step closer, their face finally emerging from the shadows. It was a face I would not forget, too gaunt, too eager. But it was the glint in their eyes that truly terrified me. I'm fine," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. Just taking a break. The smile widened, as if my words thrilled them. You shouldn't be here alone. It's dangerous out here. They leaned closer, their breath fogging up the window. What if something happened? I shifted in my seat, reminded of the stories I'd heard about hitchhikers and bad encounters. I had heard too many tales to let this stranger get too close. I couldn't trust them. I'll be on my way soon, I managed, my voice steadier this time. Why not just stay a while? They placed a hand on the window, almost playfully, but the gesture felt threatening instead. We could talk. Lots of interesting things happen out here at night. I felt a rush of panic, my instincts flaring. With shaky hands, I reached for the gear shift, preparing to drive away, but the driver moved in closer, their face illuminated by the harsh lights above. There was something off about their features, something that made my skin crawl. Wait, they said, their smile faltering ever so slightly as if they were suddenly aware of the fear radiating from me. You don't know me yet. Exactly, I shot back, my heart racing. I pressed the button to lock the doors, the mechanical click sounding deafening in the silence. The stranger's smile twisted, revealing teeth that looked too sharp, too eager. Don't be like that. I just want to help. They leaned against the car, unfazed by my clear discomfort, their voice now low and conspiratorial. You don't want to be out here all alone, do you? I knew I had to leave, had to get away from this predatory presence. I glanced around, searching for anyone else, but the lot felt eerily empty. Taking a chance, I slammed my foot on the gas, the tires squealing as I fled, the figure in my rearview mirror shrinking into the shadows. As I sped back onto the highway, I didn't dare look back. The darkness enveloped me, but the fear clung to my skin, a chilling reminder of the night I could never forget.